Well, thank you very much. I'm just delighted to be here, really pleased and honored to have an opportunity to speak with all of you today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, very important for our profession, and I think very topical in our country and in the world today. And I'm lingering on this title slide because this work was done with a very diverse group of co-authors. So this presentation that I put together for you today comes from numerous publications that have been done by this writing group that is diverse in terms of age, position along the neurosurgical hierarchy, race, nationality, persuasion, and so forth. So I'm just delighted to share this work of our group. Also, you'll notice that it's a very colorful presentation, and that speaks to diversity. And that's a little teaser. I'll tell you why we have those colorful illustrations that that are peppered throughout this at the end, so that you stay tuned. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and it really is an honor to be with you today. Before I talk about our first article on this, I want to show you something that I'm reading right now. It's called Secrets of the Spracher. And I love this word. And Susan Pannullo is on. She's a great example of Spracher. It's an Icelandic word for extraordinary women. There isn't really an equivalent in English or in most other languages, but Eliza Reid, this book was just published this week. So I've just read it, and I highly recommend it because it's a very interesting, I'm holding it up so you can see it. I'm not getting royalties for this. I just enjoyed it. Elizabeth Reid is the First Lady of Iceland. She's Canadian born, happened to do a postdoc at Oxford, met and then eventually married a handsome Icelandic man who was a history professor. And to both of their surprise, he now 20 years later is the president of Iceland. But on most international rankings, Iceland has been at the top of the list for over a decade in terms of equality and equity between the sexes. So this is a very interesting book that talks about how Iceland did that and what it's like to be a man or a woman in Iceland. We've just submitted a paper for peer review on the history of neurosurgery in Iceland. And so I think there's a lot we can learn from that. Anyway, that's an aside, but it may be some interesting reading for some of you. But I did get very interested in the topic of diversity in neurosurgery, just because I was a woman in neurosurgery and there weren't a lot of them at the time that I was starting. Certainly that has changed and we are making progress, and that's part of what I want to share with you today. But the whole point of the thrust of this talk, I would say in one word, what I hope to one sentence, what I hope to convince you of is that diversity is necessary for excellence. And this team that we put together a couple years ago that looked at diversity in neurosurgery and diversity in other fields and what we could learn from them has convinced me that not only is it the right moral thing to do to diversify our beloved specialty, but it's also the right thing to do if all you care about is excellence and outcome. And so I hope I'll be able to convince you of that. And certainly my co-authors share that. So let's start out with this premise that I think we can all agree upon, that we need the best possible people to go into neurosurgery. We who are in the profession feel that way, and the public feels that way. And so what I hope to convince you that our research, in fact, the data show that a key driver of excellence and innovation is diversification. So these are the four areas that I'd like to go over with you today. First, the role of diversity in academic neurosurgery, which drives many of our themes in practice. diversity issues historically in neurosurgery, then what lessons in our research we've learned from other professions, and then what the benefits of diversity are for other systems outside of medicine. So let's start with academic neurosurgery. So anyone who's a medical student is in an academic center. Anyone who's a resident or a faculty member is an academic center. And you just can't get around the fact that careers for individuals, departments, and institutions are in the United States and around the world largely made or not based on major funding. And in the United States, the major funding for what we do comes from the NIH. And so the NIH takes diversity very seriously, and therefore we should too. And what I'm sharing with you is just a few screenshots from the very robust part of the NIH website on diversity. So they are interested in outcomes, as anyone who's submitted an NIH grant knows, and they are, because of this, they're actively funding diversity studies and a diverse scholar group. So they have found, for example, that implicit bias is real, and they have active measures to obviate that or to mitigate against it. Stereotype threats are real. Institutional prestige bias is real. So the NIH looks critically at all these things and continues to study them in order to be certain that we don't miss the opportunity to turn discovery into health, their mantra, by overlooking segments of the population. Now let's spend some time on neurosurgery, our own beloved specialty. Now, this early photograph of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, then known as the Harvey Cushing Society, shows that neurosurgery has been, you could say, diverse from the beginning, because in fact, Dr. Louise Eisenhardt was not only a founding member, but she was the first president of what became the AANS, and she was the first editor-in-chief of the Journal of Neurosurgery. She was not a neurosurgeon, she was a neuropathologist. She was Harvey Cushing's right hand, and together they studied brain tumors and wrote numerous monographs that really are the foundation for our field. So there's no question that there was early on respect for productivity and intellect in our field. But it did take some time before neurosurgeons were women. Remember, Dr. Eisenhardt was a neuropathologist. So as with Harvey Cushing, who created the field of neurosurgery, but himself was trained at a time when there were just surgeons, Diana Beck and Sofia Ionescu in the UK and Romania, respectively, were general surgeons who in the 40s and 50s devoted their practices increasingly to focus on neurological surgery. But the first woman anywhere in the world to be board certified in neurological surgery actually was from Turkey, Professor Altanok in 1959. And then the first woman to be board certified in the United States was from my own institution, I'm proud to say, Ruth Kerr Jacoby from the George Washington University in 1961. And then that spread throughout the world, so that by 1968, the diminutive but very powerful T.S. Kanaka became the first Indian woman to be board certified in neurosurgery. But we'll come back to the race issue, but look at Dr. Canaday's certification in 1984, a full 23 years, a generation after Dr. Jacoby. And then my good friend Nadia El-Abadi, who's the president-elect of the WFNS, is the first woman professor of neurosurgery in Africa. And she is alive and very active. So you can see, although we're making progress, it's very recent. And I'd ask you to recall that neurological surgery as a discipline is thought to have started or we date our origins back to 1919. So it's only very recently that women are board certified and assuming leadership positions. You might recognize the goofy looking gal seated in the front row there, but this was in 1989 when we started Women in Neurosurgery. This group of women at one of our large national meetings recognized that there were other women at the meeting for the first time and decided to get together casually for drinks that night. And from that became Women in Neurosurgery in 1989. So change doesn't happen overnight. Women in Neurosurgery was incorporated in 89, but you can see by 2008, so nearly 20 years later, women in neurosurgery were enough of a force that the AANS Board of Directors requested a white paper on how to recruit and retain more women in neurological surgery. And from that request came the article that I've just shown you. And then Jim Bean was the president of the AANS at that time and was really struck by this issue and requested to write an editorial about it and summarized the position of the board at that time by saying, we acknowledge the need for active measures to ensure that every neurosurgeon enjoys the same benefits and opportunities by dismantling the barriers and offering a hand against the remaining gulfs that separate the privileged from the deserving. So in this construct of diversity, it's a do the right thing or include for the moral imperative reason, which was and remains noble, but it's not the only reason. So let's look at some of the data. Currently, only about 6% of ABNS certified practicing neurosurgeons are women. And I show you what it was like in 1980. This comes from Bosch and Rutga's reevaluation 20 years on to our white paper. And you can see that the progress is definitely there, but some might call it at a glacial speed. It's moving in the right direction, but it is slow. And then if you look at the other major minority group, women and then African Americans within neurosurgery, you see that less than 4% of neurosurgeons in the US are Black or African American. And then the intersectionality of those two gets you down to less than 1%. So that's not less than 1% of the US population. So if we believe in following the Ottawa Accords that say the simple principle that any active and healthy organization represents in its composition its target service group. So teachers should look like the students they teach, and doctors should look like their patient group. If we believe that's true, then we have a little ways to go. So in terms of academics, which we started out talking about, it's no surprise to anybody in academics that although as women became the majority of medical school graduates, and then in some disciplines became the majority of residents, and certainly the numbers have increased in neurosurgery, the progress up into the higher levels, so from assistant to associate to full professor rank, really slows down for women. And then in addition to academic ranking, there's also a pay gap, which you may not care about unless you're married to a neurosurgeon, and then you really care that someone is paid what they are worth. And that, of course, is not a problem only in pay inequity for neurosurgery, but across the board in medicine. So this initial effort in 1989 in the United States has been taken up and recapitulated in many other organizations within neurosurgery. So the World Federation of Neurosurgical Societies started its Women in Neurosurgery Committee a dozen years ago. The EANS only about 5 years ago, and that's a diversity task force. So it's not only women, but it looks at all of those areas. So a very interesting thing happened quite recently. This paper, I mentioned earlier that the fact that neurosurgery dates its origins to 1919, and that comes from a meeting of the Surgical Association that was hosted by the Mayo brothers, and Harvey Cushing presented his work on brain tumors that he and Dr. Louise Eisenhart had put together. And their work and that paper were so impressive to the rest of the surgeons there that Dr. Mayo stood up and said, "Gentlemen," and of course it was all gentlemen then, "Gentlemen, I believe we have just witnessed the birth of a new specialty, neurological surgery." So that was in 1919. And so we decided in 2019 to take a look back at the first 100 years of neurosurgery in order to perhaps better peer forward into what we might expect in our second century as a discipline. And this paper, this 100-year paper, really caught some attention. It was looking back on 100 years of neurosurgery, the contributions of American women. And this was viewed by a large number of people around the world. And it led to this. It led to women neurosurgeons writing groups during the COVID pandemic on every continent. And I'm happy to say that in the last year and a half, the entire history of women in neurosurgery in every country has been published. It's a series of about 12 papers spread across Journal of Neurosurgery, Neurosurgical Focus, Journal of Clinical Neuroscience, and a few others. But I call your attention to the article on the left, one of the very few single author papers written by Robert Spicher. This one is entitled "The Progress of Women in Neurosurgery." He published it in the Asian Journal of Neurosurgery at the request of Yoko Kato in 2011, so 10 years ago. And Dr. Spicher said that the scant historical literature devoted to women in the field of neurosurgery suggests not that their contributions are less worthy than those of their male counterparts, as much as that their contributions have yet to be fully recounted. Well, now they have been fully recounted between 2019 and the present. There has been these writing groups that I mentioned and a number of papers. The final one was just submitted, which is a discrete history of women neurosurgeons in Canada. So the history is there, and shame on us if we don't use it and cite it as we go forward. And of course, having those writing groups over the last year and a half and meeting with people allowed me to discover people like this outstanding Thai cerebrovascular neurosurgeon who happens to be a beautiful medical illustrator as well. So I mention her purely out of the delight in discovering her. And also, if you need someone who's really talented to illustrate any of your technical papers, just let me know. Well, let's move from the gender issue in neurosurgery to the racial issue so that we know our history. I think that's an important part of gaining strength and competence as we go into the future. So the first African-American neurosurgeon to be board certified was Clarence Green in 1953. So note that that was 8 years before Ruth Kerr Jacoby, the first woman. So it gives us an idea of how these firsts are happening in American society. Deborah Hyde followed quite a few years later, and a couple years after Alexa Canaday. This is a name that I would love for all of you and more people in neurosurgery to know, Dr. Tunde Odaiku. an absolutely inspirational man, the first African-American neurosurgeon to be trained in the United States. He was born in Nigeria, but he trained at Michigan in the late 50s. He was board certified in the US in 1961, so shortly after Dr. Green. And then Dr. Odaiku went back to Nigeria, and there and in the United States continued to be an inspirational mentor to many neurosurgeons. And he's also a beautiful poet, and those are my copies of his beautiful 2 books of poetry that are there. He's quite an inspirational person, and we have a rich history, and I'm so pleased that it includes him, and think more people should know about him. Well, in our times, in the era of Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and movements that hopefully are an inflection point in diversity, equity, inclusion, we see that even people who are fairly privileged in our society, that is, Black neurosurgeons, felt obliged to comment on what was going on in terms of race in America after the George Floyd murder. And so I think it's worth reading the highlights of what our colleagues, African-American neurosurgeons, said about that we are in the unique position to speak up against cyclical and the imminent public health threats to the Black community fiercely and persistently, and that the excessive use for police force and violence is a public health issue. And many of us feel strongly that neurosurgeons could and should use the position that we enjoy in society to help move our society toward a more just position on many public health issues, including this one. Well, let's talk about other racial diversity. So this is a lovely article published in the March 2021 issue of Neurosurgical Focus, which I was really pleased to be able to serve as co-editor. That was devoted, as you may know, Neurosurgical Focus is a monthly peer-reviewed journal that is part of the Journal of Neurosurgery Publishing Group, but it is thematically organized. And in March of 2021, we had an entire issue devoted to international women neurosurgeons, past, present, and future. I strongly recommend you take a look at that. And this is just a lovely article that we published there about Linda Liao, who is the chairman of neurosurgery at UCLA. She's in the National Academy of Medicine and Institute of Medicine, world-class researcher, and also an optimist. Well, this whole issue of diversity and even talking about it can separate people into believers and unbelievers. I bring up Charles Murray because he has been a lightning rod for some of these issues and would, I think, self-identify as someone who is very much on the far right in terms of how he views these issues. And I bring up his book on human diversity because what he does in his thinking, his research, and in his writing is he faces squarely the biology of gender, race, and class. He tackles the tenets of what he calls the orthodoxy, that gender is a social construct, that race is a social construct, that class is a function of privilege. And he goes through virtually everything that's been published by scientists to debunk those ideas. So he's very controversial in that. But I think we are scientists, and we need to look carefully at the science of human diversity and the biology of race. So one of the things, the studies that he brings up, I invite you to kind of walk through this with me. So this was from some research published in 2004, a framework for thinking about sex differences. So look at those two faces that you see there, and then think about how you would answer the questions of which of the two individuals there is more likely to be self-confident, petty, jealous, demonstrate leadership potential, be intelligent. You can go through a series of what should be gender neutral adjectives that would describe a human personality. And it turns out that the person on the left, who has a hairstyle that most people would interpret as being a woman, and the person who has a hairstyle on the right that most people would interpret as being a man, actually the facial features are completely identical, but yet we assign, without even knowing who they are, just based on gender, we assign positive or negative attributes to them. And so being aware of our own implicit biases is really important to moving forward in this era. So Murray concludes his book with the affirmation of what Steven Pinker has written about, the famous and really very eloquent scholar of human nature, that equality is not the empirical claim that all groups of humans are interchangeable. We're not. But it's the moral principle that individuals should not be judged or constrained by the average properties of their groups. So equal, equitable does not have to mean same or interchangeable. Well, let's move on to other types of diversity. Let's talk about gender minorities and what it might feel like to be LGBTQ in a neurosurgical residency or department. Let's talk about how we feel about immigrants in general. And then let's talk about how we feel about these three immigrants who are absolute stars in neurological surgery, who are geographic transplants. So, we hear not so nice things said in the surgical lounge about immigrants, but where would we be without, Ghazi Yazergil, Dr. Q, Volker Sonntag, for that matter, Robert Spetzler. So it may even be that there are aspects of resilience that are honed by immigration from one country to another that predispose for success in neurosurgery. And then what about neurosurgeons living with a disability? Let's just ponder this. This is someone who's practicing today, who was taken aside when he was a resident by a senior and told he should go and find something else to do, as I'd never make a decent neurosurgeon with a stutter. Well, we all know that you can be a perfectly superb neurosurgeon with a stutter. And indeed, we currently have a president of the United States who has lived with a stutter. So why do we have these implicit biases? And then as I get older, I get more and more interested in the ageism bias. And if you look at this photograph taken in a recent, pre-pandemic AANS meeting, you can see that the people in the audience, and indeed the people practicing, skew toward the older. And we want to be a dynamic specialty. We must be. And so if we look at other fields, we might want to think about how we build Encore careers into neurosurgery. At 53, Bill Gates famously stepped away from Microsoft and started what he feels is his most important career, and that is his career as a philanthropist. Now, we're not all going to make billions of dollars, but the fact remains that we are still in the first generation in the history of the world in which people, particularly neurosurgeons, are likely to have health and age well beyond the major portion of their career and income earning years. How are we going to give back? How do we set up our field so that we value that experience and that knowledge? Well, let's shift just a little bit away from neurosurgery. It's always useful to kind of step back and see, well, what can we learn from other professions? And here I'll take you back to FDR, who in 1943 said, we need to cultivate the science of human relationships and the ability of all people of all kinds to live together and work together in the same world at peace. And this could have been said this morning, right? It's so clear that that is a universal and perennial need to cultivate the science of human relationships. And in particular, he was heading toward, and it was his successor, President Truman, who executed this presidential order, 9981, in July of 48, which forcibly, by presidential order, desegregated the US military. So it's worth examining this because the desegregation of the US military is the largest ever program in, you could call it affirmative action, but in social engineering in order to force equity. And what we have learned is that diversity, in order to be able to proceed on a human lifetime timeline rather than a glacial timeline, needs some high level political commitments. So what we know is that diversity must reach the leadership level. And here we have a breakdown, busy slide, but it just shows that minority groups are overrepresented now in the military in every enlisted position across all branches of our armed forces, but they are not adequately represented at the flag ranks yet. And so diversity must reach the leadership level. And the good news about this happening in the US military is that there's transparency and there's accountability. So when these things are done with taxpayer dollars, then there's institutional long-term policy commitment so that the Army, the Marine Corps, every branch of the military, you can look them up and see what is their diversity roadmap? What are they doing to try to get to that ideal where at every rank of that branch of the armed forces, the faces of the leaders and the enlisted look like the faces and the backgrounds of the people in that group. And there's congressional oversight for that. Well, let's now move from the military to business. What can we learn from the business world about this? Well, we know that diversity improves performance, it increases competitiveness, and it improves customer and employee relationships. I think this is a great book. And in fact, all of these Harvard Business Review's compendia, where they take their best writing over the years on a given topic and put those together as must reads, are really helpful. And this one on diversity is particularly so. There's also one on women in leadership. But in this one, the best articles describe this kind of stepwise history of what happens with positive steps toward diversity. The first step is assimilation, where you allow a crack in the door, you allow entry to non-like people. So you allow women into medical school, you allow African Americans to serve in the military, and there's assimilation. Everybody tries to do the same thing. You don't really know differences. It's a common and level playing field. And then as that assimilation occurs, then the next step is differentiation. There's a willingness and increasing comfort with being able to recognize that the women in medicine actually bring some particular skill sets that might be helpful to medicine. The African Americans in the military bring some life experiences and some skill sets that might be helpful for the military. So some differentiation is permitted because it moves the whole group forward. And then finally, integration, and that is the door is open, the different strengths and points of view are recognized, and that becomes just the order of the day. And that allows everyone to move farther and faster. There are so many examples of this. I share with you just one slide in the interest of time from Boston Consulting Group that looked at companies with more diverse leadership teams, and they report higher innovation revenue. So even if everything I've already said about justice and fairness and doing the right thing doesn't speak to someone, we all care about making money. And the business experience is that if you have a more diverse team, you're going to have higher revenue. Well, finally, let's look at a few other things. I mean, tied to the market is economic theory. And it might seem obvious that diversification works in our portfolios. And we all do that. If we have even a few nickels to rub together, we look at how we can diversify our portfolio. But that was not always the accepted wisdom. That was something that required economic scientific proof. So much so that when that was proved by Harry Markowitz, he won the 1990 Nobel Prize for developing the economic theory of diversification, which very simply stated that the more types of investments a person has, the more likely one is to have a net gain with lower risk, something that we virtually all accept now and practice ourselves. And yet that required proof. So if you look at the top line there, that's not a very diverse group, but these are, major proponents of portfolio diversification in the 20th century. And then even into the 21st century in the upper right, these are the big proponents of diversification. They're not a very diverse looking group themselves, but look at the bottom row. Those are also the more modern experts in portfolio diversification. So it's gathering steam, and it's a real thing. And then finally, what about ecology and biodiversity? With all this talk about diversity, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it merely chance that there are over 5 million species of life on Earth, or is there perhaps some Darwinian advantage conferred to nature by the presence of this diversity? So there are really too numerous to mention articles here about this in the natural sciences, but numerous peer-reviewed studies have shown that biodiversity improves the average level of a performance of a system. Look at a rainforest, look at a coral reef. It enhances the productivity and the stability of the system. It improves resilience to negative change and lowers the risk of negative outcomes. So this is real. So I would say, as we start to wrap up here, that economics has shown us the value of diversification. Biology, ecology has shown us the benefits of diversification, that performance is improved, productivity, reliably, and so forth. I hope that this review has convinced you that if we go back to that initial statement that we all agreed upon, that we need the best possible people in neurosurgery, then excellence, innovation, and strength for our profession are most likely going to be achieved through diversification. So with that, I'd like to thank my wonderful and wonderfully diverse team. And then I told you I'd tell you about the colors and the graphics, because they also speak to diversity. This is Javier Yep, who is a student from Peru who was getting his master's in graphic design at Santa Clara State, and designed this, I think, beautiful unity and diversity flag. And so I use it on any talk on diversity with his permission. And then finally, the beautiful painting, very bright colors and very thickly applied from Jeff Hanson, who sadly we lost recently, a neurosurgical patient with optic nerve gliomas, which made him visually impaired. But as he said, that's what made him a great artist and made him a great philanthropist. And such that before he left his 20s, he was able to raise close to $10 million for good causes with his painting. So with that, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you, to talk about this important subject for the field that we all love. With that, I'll stop sharing. I hope we have some time for questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rousseau. That was really fantastic. I really like how you brought in some other ways of kind of convincing the audience that diversity is great. So if anyone has any questions, you can write them in the Q&A box or the chat, whichever works best for you. But I guess while we're waiting for some questions, I could ask you one. So I know obviously we're talking about diversity, and you mentioned that you touched upon how feeling represented is kind of seeing people that look like you. And obviously you started in this field when it was entirely males, not just predominantly males. So how did you kind of navigate that without seeing yourself represented?
Well, I think this is an important concept in mentorship, that although it's nice to have a mentor that looks like you, they don't have to. None of us are unidimensional. None of us are. And so, yes, all of my mentors were men as I was coming up, but now I have mentors that are students and residents, people whose way of doing this thing or that thing or conducting themselves I really admire, and therefore I pattern that aspect of what I do after them. So I think the notion that, women can only have women mentors and African Americans can only have African American mentors really doesn't celebrate the individual diversity we all have within us. So I like to think of one's training as being an assembling of what I call your personal board of directors. So rather than finding one mentor, I encourage people to find several. In fact, I haven't really come up with this idea. I noticed it, but the Wall Street Journal has this every weekend. They have an interview with someone who's been successful in business, and then they identify who their board of directors are, their personal board. So, if you take the neurosurgical career as an example, you may have one mentor who, like Dr. Pannullo is going to speak about, who helps you navigate how to get involved in organized neurosurgery. You may have another mentor who helps you get involved in a research lab. You may have another one who helps you learn how to do good scientific writing for peer-reviewed publications. You might have another in, a host of other things. And so I think it's important for mentors and mentees to not limit themselves to only people who look like them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that lends to diversity itself, just branching out with different mentors. And I think we can't get around only finding women as mentors in this field. So it does give us a broader perspective. Do you have any advice for the audience for how to go about finding mentors? I know this kind of brings us into our next topic, but yeah. I figured I'd ask you.
Well, one thing I would say is there are a lot of mentor programs now. People have recognized this is a valuable thing, to have a direct personal relationship with someone who's sort of, been through it before or is farther down the same path than you are. But I have not found that sort of forced mentorships are very effective programs. These things where the senior people sign up and the junior people sign up, and then you get assigned a mentor and a mentee. I'm sure it occasionally works, but I've found that a more organic evolution tends to work better, because that's how human relationships are, right? Don't tell me I have to be a friend with this person. You gather with people because you have something in common. I think that when you're the mentee and you recognize that someone has something that you need or that you want to learn more about along some of those axes that I mentioned, where you might want to learn more about how to get involved in organized neurosurgery, research, global neurosurgery, professional and scientific writing. There's kind of a smorgasbord of things that we all want to be in order to be effective maximally in what we do. I wouldn't hesitate to approach someone, whether they're green, blue, older, younger, who has skill set that you have, and, tell them that you like what they're doing. You'd like to learn that from them. But all healthy relationships go back and forth. There should be something for both mentor and mentee. So, come to the mentor with, I'd like to work with you on this, and here's what I'm bringing to the table. I already have this skill in the lab, or I've already published on this, or I see you're the new chair of this or that committee. Do you need someone to serve in the secretariat who can set up Zoom meetings and take the minutes? That may seem like, a drag, it's administrative work, but as Susan will probably tell you, that's when you're at the crux of all the communication of everything that happens, is when you're doing those sorts of things. So that's actually kind of a privileged position, and one that allows you to learn and grow a lot. So finding a way for there to be a bilateral exchange of talents is important as well.
Okay, there is a question from the audience. Are there ways in which you feel you need to modify your behavior or emphasize certain aspects of yourself when working and being respected with a predominantly male team?
Ways that I need to modify my behavior in working with a predominantly male team. That's a tough question, because it's been a predominantly male team for almost all of my adult life. So I don't know that I probably had to modify some behavior early on, but it's become part of me now. I think most female neurosurgeons probably have some qualities that the general public would maybe assign to be male, sort of. We may be a little bit less patient than the average person. We may be a little bit more sort of results oriented. We may be much more fanatic about punctuality. When you've been making rounds at, 5:30 in the morning for a long time, it does, this idea that, women are always late, it just doesn't set right with, any woman that I know. We're not wired that way anymore. So I guess what I would say is I think all neurosurgeons, all people in medicine gravitate to a set of behaviors that I think are probably not necessarily male or female, but they're medical. And one of them is punctuality. Another one is this sort of no explaining, no complaining kind of philosophy that is also in the US military. That's neither male nor female, but those two things are very deeply bred into behavior if you're in medicine, including neurosurgery.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I feel like in this day and age, we do gravitate to what suits our personal traits. And I feel like that really does go along with this. So thank you. Well, it doesn't seem like there are any more questions, so I don't want to keep, oh, wait, there might be another one. Okay, many of my female peers say they feel they cannot consider a surgical specialty, especially neurosurgery, because they believe it is incompatible with having children. What would you say to a medical student who wants children and is interested in neurosurgery?
I would say it is not incompatible. I have two absolutely wonderful children. One is in medicine, one is not. But both of them would tell you if they were here that it was definitely an advantage to them to have had a mother who is a neurosurgeon. So I do think you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time. And that applies to any field. So there will be times when you're reading Goodnight Moon and you get called into the hospital. But what we do is, as surgeons, is so concrete that from the age of about 4, kids get it. And I know with my own children, in those days we had computers that were literally in our bedside stand, and the phone would ring or the computer would turn on and there would be a series of CAT scans, and my kids from about age 4 would know that a big white blob inside the white circle meant that there was blood in somebody's head, and they would say to me, "Mommy, go, go take care of Mr. Smith." And at breakfast the next day or at dinner, they'd say, "How's Mr. Smith doing?" So we're lucky that what we do is so concrete and therefore easily understood by children from a very early age. It's not the same as being in venture capital and having to do things that are numeric and abstract and pretty hard to understand until you're a fairly senior student. Kids will understand, but you need to have a dedicated partner, and increasingly men want to have time with their children too, which I think is a great thing. And so, we've long had paternity leave as well as maternity leave for our residents, and it's important that they take it.
Okay, yes, someone from the audience said, "That's precious. Thank you so much for sharing that story in this talk. It was fantastic."
Well, Kristen Worth, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and do let me know if I can be of any help to you. I will say, and I'm sure the other women neurosurgeons that are speaking today will say that a career in neurosurgery, so not just the residency, but the life in neurosurgery is biting off a lot. There's that Nike ad that says, "All it takes is all you've got." And that's true of neurosurgery. It is going to take a lot. And so I say to anyone, male or female, who's considering it, that if it's the only thing you can imagine doing, that you just absolutely love it and don't want to do anything else, then you must do it, and you'll find a way to make everything else work. But it is true that all it takes is all you've got. And so it's like a marathon for a lifestyle. And so you want to be sure that you really love it. I can tell you, I really love neurosurgery. I love, I'm just like a sponge about everything about the brain. And most neurosurgeons I know are just that way. It's not a 9-to-5 thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, even in my medical school career. So if you have time for 2 more questions.
I do.
Okay, so Madison is asking, is there an ideal time for a woman in neurosurgery to have kids and get married?
Well, I would say there's an ideal partner and you work it out together. I mean, it has to be someone who takes your career in neurosurgery as seriously as you do, and then you work it out together. What do people typically do? Having a child on a research year, and most programs have 1 or 2 years of research, tends to work out, or taking a gap year. No matter what field you're in, my friends who are in banking and the law say, there's never a perfect time to take time to have a child, but it's really the partner that makes a difference.
And then she's also asking, do you feel supported at work when it comes to attending to your family?
Yes, I do. Did I always? No. I mean, the relations, the things that people say or do to help one another is as variable as people are. So, when I was a resident, for instance, it was okay to ask, are you going to get pregnant and have a child? I actually didn't. I didn't take any time off at all during my residency, but 2 of my male colleagues did. One had a cholecystectomy and was off for 3 months, and one had open heart surgery and was off for 4. So, there are going to be things that happen, male or female, to your colleagues. And if you're a good team player and you pitch in and help them with whatever their thing is, then they'll help you. And that's just how it is. Now, the other thing that is becoming much more of an issue is elder care. So there are a lot of people in medicine who are the oldest son, and who, when the parent has memory issues, has a stroke, has a heart attack, that son has to be there. My gosh, for your parents who put you through med school and all of that. So the focus has been, up to this point in time, on women in medicine, because, well, they're the ones who are going to bear and, to a large degree, take care of the young children. But the issues that are starting to come up more and more often is the care of older people, and what happens when you are in the full thrust of your practice and you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and your parents need you a lot. It's not very admirable to not do that. And so, there's a lot of pitching in for one another that happens well beyond residency throughout your career. It just shifts what the needs are.
So someone's asking if you would mind putting your email address in the chat.
I will. I guess I put it at the end of my talk, but let me put it in the chat as well.
Perfect.
Happy to do that.
Thank you so much. All right.
There you go.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for giving your time and this fantastic talk and answering all these questions.
My pleasure. It's been a real pleasure to be with you. I hope to hear from some of you, and I hope to see all of you at the AANS meeting in Philadelphia that's coming up in April.
Yes.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, Dr. Mew.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Where are you? You're in a car?
I am not driving though. I'm at a thing for my family at our synagogue. So.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, sorry, I don't want to take too much of your time, but
I'm perfectly happy. This is good.
Okay. Hi, Monica.
Hey. Hi, Dr. Mia.
Hello.
Okay, so this section is a story of mentorship with Dr. Mew and Dr. Mureb. So it's kind of unstructured, but I just wanted to leave it that way so that we could kind of just discuss with the group just our mentorship up till this point and how we found each other, I guess, and how that makes a difference. And yeah, so I guess I wanted to introduce you guys first. So Dr. Mew is the Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery and Surgical Director of the Pediatric Epilepsy Program at Westchester Medical Center. She earned her medical degree from Columbia and a Master of Health Sciences degree in clinical research from Duke. She completed a residency in neurosurgery and fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery at Emory in Atlanta, and she's renowned for her expertise in pediatric epilepsy surgery and has published on the use of innovative neurosurgical technologies, including intraoperative electrocorticography, cortical language mapping, and laser ablation in this field. Prior to joining Westchester Medical Center 2 years ago, she spent 8 years as an assistant professor and attending at Duke. And Dr. Mureb went to the New York Institute of Technology for medicine. She was born and raised in Westchester. She attended the College of Arts and Sciences at NYU, where she majored in neuroscience and graduated with honors. She then received her degree in osteopathic medicine, and she completed a research fellowship at NYU with Dr. Konziolka and Rina. And her interests include open and endovascular neurosurgery and stereotactic neurosurgery.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for being here. So yeah, like I said, this is a little bit unstructured, but I just kind of wanted us each to go through our journeys with mentorship in this field and kind of just answer any questions that people have. So I don't mind starting. My journey is much shorter than everyone else's, but I guess my journey started about 8 years ago. I was in college and I found some great mentors. Obviously, they were male because it's a male predominant field, but I didn't really think anything of that. And they still are my mentors to this day. They're still fantastic, but I think it really does make a difference having females be your mentors as well. Dr. Rousseau really gave a great talk before this that kind of touched upon that you really don't necessarily see yourself in a field if you don't feel represented in the field. And I don't think I really noticed that until I actually met Dr. Mew. I remember meeting her and thinking, wow, I really don't have to change much about myself. She is really peppy and easy to get along with, approachable, and I just really felt at ease with that. So thank you, Dr. Mew, for being great. Yeah, so I guess if you want to go next, Monica, kind of tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Like Devin, most of my initial mentors in neurosurgery were or are male, and they do continue to be. The first neurosurgeon I really developed a relationship with, his name is Dr. Abrams. He was actually my neighbor, and he was a long time attending at Westchester, which is funny. But he allowed me to spend the summer with him and just shadow him, and that was really my first deep dive into neurosurgery. It was mostly spine. I saw one cranie, and I think the cranie was really where I got hooked. And then after studying neuroscience at NYU, I realized that I really love the science of it all too. So, and the actual biology and physiology of just the nervous system. So that really was my introduction into neurosurgery. And then once I got to med school, I took a year off. And like Devin said, I spent a year at NYU. And I became friends with the residents. They were obviously both male and female. But my mentors, Dr. Konziolka and Dr. Rina and Dr. Tinweer, they were all at different stages of their career. Dr. Tinweer is just a new attending, had just graduated fellowship. And then, Drs. Konziolka and Rina are much more established. So it was interesting for me to have mentorship at different levels between the residents up until people that have been in practice for 30 plus years and are very well established. And then once I came to Westchester Med, we have a pretty strong resident attending mentor program here, and I was connected with Dr. Mew. And that has been a very fruitful relationship for me. We meet quarterly. And, even if we see each other in passing, we always just try to catch up and have like a 30-second debrief. And also, while I've been at Westchester, I've been able to develop a relationship with Devin, who I consider one of my mentees and my friends. And I met her through MSNTC. So I think one of the biggest things that neurosurgery has given me, it's just all these little communities, and you are part of this much larger community, but it's pretty amazing to me that you have, like, if you can consider it, 3 generations of mentors and mentees with you right now, me being one of them. So yeah, it's been a great journey, and every mentor is going to teach you something different. And my mentees have taught me something about myself, about them, or just about neurosurgery in general, and why I went into the profession in the first place. So, it's a very symbiotic relationship to be a mentee and a mentor.
Okay. I've been lucky that I've sort of been able to have a lot of, mentors throughout, med school and since. At med school, I didn't know any female neurosurgeons, but I had considered initially, I was thinking about going to cardiac surgery, and the cardiologist whose lab I worked in was a woman, Dr. Sue at Columbia. And then when I decided to go to neurosurgery, the residents and the attendings were fabulous, incredibly supportive. There weren't any women there at the time, but it didn't feel like that sort of mattered at the time, because I just didn't expect there to be any women. So I didn't feel like it was missing anything. I didn't really think about it. And then when I got to Emory for residency, Dr. Vive Bosch and Dr. Odette Harris were 2 female attendings who were there at the time. They each overlapped with my residency for a couple of years, and they were wonderful. And it was nice to see, women neurosurgeons who were successful, who had families, who were, they didn't have to, act in a way that wasn't natural to them. They were able to be themselves and still be successful neurosurgeons. They both left during my residency because they got offered better positions elsewhere. But there were, other women who were residents at the time. One woman 2 years ahead of me sort of became sort of my mentor in the program, Michelle Johnson. And she's, an incredible spine surgeon. And every time I would have difficulty with a case, or anytime I didn't know what to do, if there wasn't an attending around, I would just sort of call Michelle, and she was a couple years ahead of me. So she was a great mentor to have in my program. And then once I took a job at Duke, I was the only woman there until just 1 year before I left. But again, I sort of had such good relationships with a lot of the male mentors that I didn't really feel like I was missing anything not having a woman, because I'd already seen that women neurosurgeons were out there. And I had great role models. People like Dr. Rousseau and Dr. Marasco and all these amazing female neurosurgeons who were out there, who, even if I didn't sort of know them well, I knew they existed and they were well known and well respected. And, so sort of knowing that they were there and that people took them just as seriously as any other neurosurgeon, made it so I didn't have to think about sort of being female and a neurosurgeon. I could just be a neurosurgeon, if that makes sense. And then getting the chance to see other, women come up after me has been wonderful. When I was at Duke, we had lots of female residents, which I really enjoyed, seeing them grow and being able to teach them, being able to operate with them. Here we have, Dr. Mureb and another female resident who I really love working with, both of them. And it's so nice to see them and talk to them and see how they're, growing and developing and coming to their own as neurosurgeons. And then seeing the med students come through is always exciting, because, everyone's always full of energy and enthusiasm as a med student. And I really want to make sure people keep that and don't turn, jaded or bitter or any of the stereotypes, that people stay who they are. You can be, like you said, happy and peppy and full of energy and have a family and be a happy person and still be a very fulfilled neurosurgeon.
Yeah, I like what you said about not realizing that anything was missing just because you got along really well with the males in your field. I feel like that's what I didn't really realize with all of my mentors prior to this. I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, oh, they're really great. They're great people. I don't really see anything different about it. But I think a lot of these questions will come up too, because they came up prior to this, but about having a family during residency or afterwards, or how you kind of navigate those waters. And I know, Dr. Mew, you have a family, so if you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit, how you were able to do all of that.
Sure. I echo a lot of what Dr. Rousseau said, that having a supportive partner is incredibly important. I had my first child as a PGY6, and sort of that whole you don't want to take time off thing. My department hadn't really thought about having a pregnant resident before, and I didn't want to sort of feel like I was a burden to the other residents or anything like that. And so I just moved my 4 weeks of vacation that we all normally get as a resident. I just moved those to right after I gave birth, and that was my maternity leave. And I was fortunate that physically I was able to do that and bounce back to work with no problem. But obviously a lot of people physically can't do that. They need more time than that. But I was only able to sort of do that because I had an incredibly supportive husband, and whether it's, whatever sort of spouse or partner you have, I think it's important that you sort of have support, because there's going to be, obviously a lot of times when you have to go into work, in the middle of the night. Last night we were operating till 1 a.m. You need somebody else who can be home with the kids when you're doing that. And for me, I have an incredibly supportive husband who's been great. And so I had my first one as a PGY6, my second one at the end of fellowship. He timed it beautifully. He came right out at the end of fellowship. So I took a couple months off between fellowship and starting work. And then my third as an attending. And I mean, there's never, a good time, but, like we said earlier, that's true no matter what field you're in, whether you're a, lawyer or an architect or whatever you're doing, there's never going to be a time when you're like, oh, I can just sort of put my work on hold for a few months. So you have to do what works best for you and your family. And, nowadays people are going to accept the fact that you're going to need a little time off. And if you want to take more than a month, you can, and that's okay. And people aren't going to resent you for it. And there's going to be plenty of other people, like Dr. Wu said, people with medical issues that have nothing to do with pregnancy who are going to need to take time off during residency or, while you're in attending. And so you need to do what works right for you and not worry about, oh, am I going to inconvenience other people? And I definitely thought a little too much about that, but I'm glad that I had my kids anyway. And it's amazing and wonderful. And being able to have my family was very important to me. Obviously, not everyone wants to have kids. Like my sister has no desire to have kids and she's very fulfilled and happy. But for me, being a mom was very important. And so being able to have that and balance that and still have a job I love, is very important to me.
I remember I worked with a neurosurgeon in Holland after college for a little bit, and she was a female neurosurgeon and she had a family. And I remember asking her, like, how do you balance those things? How did your kids grow up? Like, she was a single mom also, so that also made it a little bit difficult. And I remember being like, how did you manage to do that? And she had a great relationship with her kids. And she just very bluntly was like, when I was home, I was home. I made them my priority. They understood that when I was there, I wanted to be only there with them. And they understood, like, when I had to go to work, I had to go to work. Yeah. So I guess my question for you then would be, how do you deal with that with your kids? Do they understand that you have to go to work and that they're a priority also?
They do. I'm really lucky. My kids are fabulous and loving and supportive and amazing. And I've always tried to sort of include them in what I do. I don't want them to resent my job or feel like it's something that takes me away from them. So before the pandemic, they used to come round with me a lot on Sunday mornings. And they would come meet the nurses and the residents. And in my old hospital, my daughter loves baking, so they would bring brownies for the residents a lot. And I mean, it was sort of a chance for them to feel like they were part of the team. And, several of my patients over the years have had anniversaries of 5 years seizure free or, 10 years after a tumor came out. And they'll have these little parties and invite me and my kids. And it's nice for them to actually see some of the kids that I've been able to help and work with over the years. And they know what I do and they love what I do. And I'm just really lucky. I mean, they, will call me a superhero and all that kind of stuff because they love the fact that I get to help kids. And, I talk about it enough that they know I enjoy it. So I don't think they resent it. It's kind of like, they have activities that they do outside of our family. And I have an activity I do outside of my family. And as a resident, it's a lot harder to be flexible with your hours. But as an attending, I can be very flexible with my hours most of the time. I can, if the kids have an event at school in the morning, I just start the OR at 10 a.m. that day. or, you know, may mean I have to work later that night, but you can be flexible. You still have huge hours of work, but you can push them around, you know, or, you know, trade calls with other people to make sure I'm not on call when my daughter has her school plays or whatever it is, to make sure I'm at every game and every play. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't had to miss anything important for the kids. I've been able to work it around things, you know, and I mean, it means you don't get a lot of sleep or a lot of social activity, but, you know, that's because the things I prioritize right now are my kids and my work, you know, and so, you know, I've told people in the past, you know, you can't have everything, but you can have what you prioritize. If something really matters to you, you can make it fit. You know, it means that you'll have to give up things like the extra sleep at night or, you know, socializing, you know, with your own friends, but I can arrange, you know, play dates for my kids with, you know, whose moms I really enjoy. And then I get my own social activity while they're doing their play date. And, you know, so you can definitely find ways to, you know, enjoy and have everything you need, you know, as long as, you know, your family is understanding the fact that you love what you do and it's not something you'd want to give up, and they would never ask me to.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's always about priorities. So that's a great point to bring home. Monica, I want to ask you actually, because I think it's very unique that there are two co-residents that are females. How is that, like, working together with Sabrina? I know you guys are both fantastic and I know you live together. So maybe you could give everyone a little talk about that.
I think having a co-resident who's female is, I'm very fortunate. She's not only like the only other female in the program, but she is my roommate, my co-resident. And we have two cats together, who we love. But you know, it's funny, honestly, I think the biggest thing we kind of like deal with, if you want to call it that, is that sometimes our attendings call us by the other person's name. So it doesn't bother us at all. Like, we think it's funny, and it's like, we're the only two females and we're like, you can't get our names right. Like, this is crazy. But you know, whether I'm called Sabrina or Monica, I respond. So, but I think in general, she's been very supportive. She's been a good support system, not only in terms of like residency dynamics, but also, you know, like, since we are the same year, we experience a lot of the same, you know, phases together. And it's nice that we have very similar responsibilities because we know how to help each other. And so if if she's in ICU and I'm holding the pager, vice versa, we know what the other person needs to do in order to, you know, go home at a reasonable hour. So we just try to help each other out as much as we can. And, you know, I think our personalities at work are very similar. And overall, she's just like a joy to work with. I like really just me. That's why I respond when people call me Sabrina, because we are so similar. That it's a relief. But yeah, I mean, you know, the other thing to really point out is that having her as a co-resident or having a guy as a co-resident, there's really no difference to me. At the end of the day, we're all part of the same team, and we just try to encourage that sort of environment.
Yeah, no, again, that's a great point. I mean, I agree. I think that you're all working together, you're all very like-minded. So it really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter if you're a male, female, whatever, but it's just sometimes it does change the dynamic. So that's great to hear. There are a few questions in the chat box. I guess this one's probably for you, Monica. It says, I'm a DO student and aware of the unfortunate stigma in medicine regarding DO physicians. I'm interested in neurosurgery and have done research at the NIH for 3 years in the field prior to starting medical school. But my decision to go the DO route feels like it'll make it harder to match in the field. Could you speak a little bit about how you were able to get your feet into the field as a DO physician and any advice for her?
I could talk about this for a long time. In brief, I will say that since I've been in residency, it hasn't even come up. Like, I don't refer to myself as a DO and my co-residents as MDs. there are other physicians in the hospital who are DO, and there's no distinction between, oh, you're an allopathic doctor or an osteopathic doctor. So I think that stigma, I guess also depending on the sort of community you're in at Westchester, it really doesn't matter. Like if you're a doctor, you're a doctor. And so I would say that I think the importance of that distinction is erases over time. And then with regards to, before getting here, there are a lot of things that I had to do to sort of stand out. And that's really where my mentorship came in. I didn't have a home program. A lot of DO programs don't. And a lot of the historical DO programs are now allopathic. So I think as that line is blurred more, hopefully the stigma over time will be reduced. But because I didn't have a home program and because I felt that stigma as well, I took a year off and I did research, and I took that time to establish myself in the general profession and community. And that's really why I spent a year at NYU, because I felt that stress a lot. And it wasn't easy. To whoever sent, I can't see the chat right now, but to whoever sent that question, you can absolutely sidebar, text or email me, and I can talk to you about that and ways to improve it. Well, not improve it, but ways to improve your experience and optimize your way of matching.
Yeah, I could put your email in the chat box if that works. If that's okay. You're muted. Okay. So some other questions, I guess. There's one in the box. It says, have you felt like you've had to work harder or prove yourself more to get to the same level of respect as your male colleagues? If so, what are some things that you did that worked well for you? That could go for both or one of you.
Yes, I think so. But I think a lot of that was sort of put on myself. Like I always felt that I needed to make sure everyone knew that I deserved to be there and that I was going to be incredibly hardworking and smart and, the best possible resident. And I don't think the department ever sort of put that on me. I think I always just wanted to make sure that there was never any doubt. For the most part, I never had to deal with a lot of sort of sexism, but there were always a few obnoxious comments, or a few attendings who would say things that were not necessary. And generally they were not, my direct attendings. They were usually in other fields. But I always sort of realized, that reflects badly on them, not on me. So it didn't really take it personally or offend me, except that it would make me sort of realize other people may see a woman that same way as not quite the same surgeon. And so I did always have to feel like I had to prove that I was smarter and better and harder working and was not going to take any time off. And no matter what medical issues I had, I was not leaving, and, to make sure no one could ever doubt it. And I think I probably could have been easier on myself and still been just as successful. But a lot of that is sort of just my personality too. I think some people's personalities are going to be more happy to just say things are going well, I'm fine. And others of us are going to be more sort of type A, always need to prove, competitive with ourselves. I can be a better version of myself kind of thing. But for the most part, the actual attendings I worked with and the people who actually had a say in my career were always very supportive and never asked me to do, anything different or be any different than any of the other residents.
Yeah, I feel like that's true. I feel like it's hard to kind of parse that out, whether or not that's like people in the field being harder on you, or it's just the field that we chose or are choosing, that this is our personality and we're always going to be critical and hard on ourselves and always want to be better. So,
yeah.
But what about you?
I think that's a part where surgeons are. Exactly. I mean, if any of us were perfectly happy to just sit around and take things as it is, none of us would want to be in this field. I mean, we all want to make a difference and advance things and create new technologies and make a mark. And, to do that, you constantly have to work harder. And so I don't think it's necessarily because I'm a woman so much as just because I'm a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think a lot of the pressures are self-imposed. But at the same time, that's really what got us to where we are. Can you repeat the beginning of the question? Because there's something I thought about.
Yes, hold on, let me go to that. Have you felt like you've had to work harder or prove yourself more to get to the same level of respect as your male colleagues?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I didn't realize as a medical student, or even on my rotations, and I know Dr. Mew has experienced this and other female residents. I think a lot of female doctors in general experience this. I am always assumed to be a nurse before I am assumed to be a doctor. And in the beginning, I mean, still now, but in the beginning, I took it very personally. And I always made a point of introducing myself as Dr. Mureb because of that, especially when I caught on to, it's not just patients thinking, like assuming that I'm a nurse, but other residents or physicians in the hospital. And that's very easy to internalize. And to, at that point, that's when I really started to want to prove, like, no, I'm not a nurse, I'm a doctor. And it's like nothing bad against nurses, but it's just, it feels disheartening that, the assumption is that you're a nurse. And so it's just, I want to work towards a general like culture shift in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Definitely. I've had conversations, especially when I was a slightly younger attending. I'd have a conversation where I'd talk to the family. I'd tell them all about the surgery, answer all the questions, tell them what I was going to do, how we were going to do it, all that. And at the end of the conversation, they'd say, so when are we going to meet the doctor? I'd be like, really? So I make a point of wearing my white coat more than I think I probably need to and things like that, just to make sure. I mean, now that I'm a little older, it's easier. But when you're younger, definitely people assume you're a nurse.
Yeah, especially because I know I'm almost 30, but I know I don't look almost 30. And so that's another thing, working against me, where people are like, you're too young to be a doctor.
Okay, there's a lot of questions, which is good. So one question is, has your excitement and passion for neurosurgery changed over time after gaining more insight and experience?
For me, no, it's grown. I absolutely love what I do. I love my kids, my patients. I love the families. I love all the new technologies and the new fun treatments that we get. And every time there's some new amazing way to treat epilepsy, I want us to be, the first to try it, to make sure it works on our kids. It's fun. I mean, every few years, especially, I'm obviously partial to functional neurosurgeon peds, but every few years, there's new fun toys, there's new technologies, laser ablation, different kinds of stimulators, all sorts of different things you can offer. Kids who 10 years ago, we would have said, there's not much I can offer for you. Now we have things we can offer. So it's always fun. There's always new sources of enthusiasm and new things that just excite you about the field. Plus for kids, there's always these adorable, wonderful families. And, if you can help them or fix their seizures, you've helped the whole family and you can help the kid for the next 80 years. So, there's always new sources of enthusiasm and enjoyment.
I think so too. I'm only PGY2, so my experience has been far less than Dr. Mew's. But I think between, my intern year and being on all these other rotations that are not neurosurgery and, being completely dedicated to neurosurgery and neurocritical care, I definitely am enjoying my time when I'm on the neurosurgery service. And I think that as I've spent, more time in residency and all the extracurriculars that we do as residents, I'm even more confused about what I want to do, because then you find all these things that are new and exciting. And I came into residency being like ready to go into the endovascular fellowship. And I still love that. And I love the experience, the endovascular and vascular experiences that I'm getting here. But there's all these other amazing things that I just didn't know. So like, I think the more you learn, definitely the more you grow, but also the more you're exposed to. And you realize that there's so much that you don't know, and that's really exciting. So I think just being a resident and being in this profession just reinforces that there's always something to learn and always something new to discover, and there's a way for you to find or do something new.
I think I can also address it, just like being a medical student. I came into medical school knowing that I wanted to do neurosurgery, but I feel like I was the minority in that, knowing what I wanted to do. And I feel like I was kind of, a lot of people tried to talk me out of it. A lot of people that weren't in the field, actually. And I spent this whole year so far, because I'm in my third year, doing these rotations, trying to talk myself out of it, because everyone was saying how horrible it was and why would you want to do that with your life. And I spent the last month in neurosurgery electives. I did one at Westchester Medical Center with Dr. Mew and Monica, and it was the best 2 weeks. And then I spent the following 2 weeks at Lenox Hill with my prior mentors, Langer and John Bookvar. And it was like the next best 2 weeks. Just the month was incredible. And I am so sad to be not on that month anymore. I'm doing my other rotations. And while I'm trying to be open-minded and learn as much as I can, I find that I am like so much more exhausted being on my psychiatry rotation, which the hours are 9 to 4, as opposed to being up at 4:30 in the morning and going to Westchester and being there until like 7 p.m. So I think that it has made me more excited just being in this field. And I think that everyone that wants to go into it should go into it and not listen to anyone, especially if they're not in the field. Like, don't be discouraged or disheartened. Follow what you feel you want to do. And if you need help doing that, the three of us are obviously willing to discuss that with you. And I'm sure everyone else that's going to be on this webinar today will also be willing to discuss things with you. So don't hesitate to reach out, especially if you need extra support at any time.
Yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes out there of, miserable surgeons who stab each other in the back and are competitive and unhappy. And it's not true, or at least it doesn't have to be. I've been very lucky that the partners I've worked with have all been very, collaborative and helpful and supportive. And it's rare, to have days when you don't want to be there. I mean, there are days when I'm tired and wish I could start 2 hours later, but there's really no time that I regret my decision to be a neurosurgeon. It's a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. If you love it and you really can't see yourself doing anything else, then stick with it, and people who are outside the field have a stereotype of it that's not necessarily accurate.
I guess this question goes more along with what we were just talking about, so I'll ask this one next. It says, I was told by an older male neurosurgeon that the culture is extremely chauvinistic, and he almost seemed to be talking me out of it. Is the culture ever sexist, misogynistic? I have not seen the intense chauvinism, but I want to know why he would say that.
So if you say, is it ever chauvinistic? Yes. Any field. There was one of the attendings at my old program who had less respect for women than I think he should have. But that was out of 15 attendings, and I rarely ever had to interact with him. All the others were perfectly supportive and treated me like any other partner. So yeah, there are going to be times when you run into, guys who are sexist, just like, people are going to run into people who are racist or homophobic or anything else, no matter what career you're in. But luckily, the majority are not. The majority of people that you will deal with are very open and supportive and welcoming and will treat you with respect because you deserve to be there. And you earned your way to being a neurosurgeon. They will treat you with respect for that. And, so yeah, there are certainly some times when I've run into people who are chauvinistic, but for the most part, it hasn't been a major issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's been a major issue for me either. If anything, people are very excited to have, female neurosurgery resident. And I think in general, people are very welcoming. And if you unfortunately, if you happen to find yourself in that culture, I think it's going to take a lot of work to not listen to those people. But they're wrong. So you are where you're supposed to be.
Well, I don't think that my answer is necessarily about like sexism, but I think it's just more so about relating to men. And I find that it was difficult for me at first, just because I am a little bit girlier than probably the traditional surgeon is supposed to be. And I remember like my first few years shadowing neurosurgeons, it was like over the summer, they would talk about like sports games and who won the night before. And I remember just being like, I don't know how to interact with this. Like, this is what you're going to talk about this entire 3-hour surgery. I just like don't know what to say. And I think that still sometimes comes up. And I don't think that it's a problem. Like, I think it's just about interests, and you can still relate with them about anything else. Because like one of the surgeons I just worked with, Randy D'Amico, is really into music. And he is not a sports guy at all. So in the OR, we would talk about music, and I was able to connect with him about that. And it wasn't like me pretending like I was interested about the football scores, like, because I just wasn't. So I think that it just goes to, you being able to relate to people in general, but your personality, if it fits with the males in the field, that's great, because then it will be easy for you to get along with people. But I think that I have been fortunate enough to not be able to really see a lot of sexism so far, which I think is good. I think that says a lot about where the field is headed.
I definitely think it's getting less every year. I mean, the only people I've met who made sort of obnoxious comments were older, and for the most part, it was a decade ago. People generally, the younger surgeons in the field, or even the older guys who just, are around more and seeing more women come through, I think are losing a lot of that chauvinistic mentality that they may have had, 30 years ago.
Okay, so someone else is asking, what are the differences in time off allowances between resident, fellow, and attending?
Every program is going to be a little different. Most residencies, I think 4 weeks, although now you guys have a few extra days too for like personal days. As an attending, I know that I think it's supposed to be 4 weeks of vacation of the year, but I mean, you can take extra time if you need to for things, if you have medical issues or conferences to go to, for the most part, you can make things work. But now I think residents, Monica, you can answer better. You guys have personal days now too, in addition to a few weeks of vacation, right?
Yeah. So now that specifically Westchester is growing, we're given 4 weeks, meaning like 4 weeks of work days, if you consider it just Monday through Friday. And then we try to bookend the weekends. So it ends up being, a total of 9 or 10 days if you're really lucky. And then sometimes you're like taking call into the morning of the first weekend, or starting night flow the weekend that you come back. And then we have 4 personal days, and we have, like pretty crazy amount of sick days, even though no one uses those. Like 12 days of the year. I know some programs prefer the residents to stack like 2 weeks at a time. But we try to do 1 every quarter, and same thing with personal days, which I really like. So yeah, and then with regards to like the fellow schedule, I know we mainly have endovascular fellows, and I'm not completely sure what their schedule works like, but I would imagine that they also have 4 weeks. They also take a lot more call because there's only 2 of them, and there are 52 weeks in the year.
Yeah, as a fellow, I think I had 4 weeks, the same as I did as a resident. But I mean, they were flexible in that, I needed an extra week in order to not have to come back after my son was born, and they didn't care. So most programs will be flexible if you need a little extra time here or there. And I think the personal days are a fabulous addition. I mean, I don't think I went to the dentist for 6 years of my residency because there was just never a day to go. So it doesn't sound like, 4 days a year is very much, but I think that kind of, being able to have a doctor's appointment, go to the dentist, even get a haircut. I mean, a basic thing that you normally wouldn't think about, having a couple of days during the year when you can sort of have that time, I think is a nice addition.
Yeah, you learn to stack all of your appointments in that one day. And then it's sometimes it's an exhausting day, but it's very productive. And then you feel like a new person when you come back.
I feel like I even try to do that now in med school, especially on rotations, because you really don't get that many days off. So, okay, so someone's asking a very important question. So I'm going to ask this to the group before the other ones. What would you advise medical students who cannot imagine doing anything other than neurosurgery, but find themselves in a culture institution with male neurosurgeons who discourage or openly do not support women as neurosurgeons? Should we find mentors elsewhere? And is this seen as a disadvantage if our own program is unsupportive?
Yes, find mentors elsewhere. It would be a little bit of a disadvantage in that people are going to look at the recommendation letters you get from your home program. And if those recommendation letters are not strong, that certainly could, hurt a bit, but you can make up for that by having strong letters from other mentors. So, it's very common for people who want to go into neurosurgery to take a research year. I was at a school that was very supportive of neurosurgeons, but I changed my mind from cardiac to neuro partway through med school. So I took a research year, to make sure it's what I wanted. Monica took a research year, to get lots of publications and to meet people in the field and to get, really strong letters of recommendation. And I think that's a common thing now. So it wouldn't look weird to have a year at another program. And if you have really strong letters of recommendation from those other mentors that you work with, and if you've got publications that show that, you can take a project and you can, bring it through to publication, those things I think can definitely make up for a letter that may not be very strong from your home program. But it will take extra effort, yes, because you'll have to go elsewhere to find that.
You could also reach out to us, like I said before. I think that we would be happy to help in any way that we can. I mean, obviously, I don't have any say in your application process, but I can just help you navigate finding people, especially through the MSNTC. I've connected with a lot of people, so that could definitely be helpful for you as well. So I'll put my my email in the chat as well toward the end of this.
Yeah, definitely find mentors, find people where you can go shadow them in the OR, see what surgeries are like, make sure that you actually enjoy neurosurgery with supportive people around you.
Yeah, I actually had a friend in medical school. She worked tirelessly to match into neurosurgery, and due to a number of circumstances, including what she felt like was poor mentorship, she ultimately decided not to pursue this career. And I think that's a shame. I think you shouldn't limit yourself. And if you can't find the support where you are now, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just going to be a little harder to find.
Okay, so someone's asking, do we have to take a research year? Is there a way to compensate if we don't?
You don't have to. It's common now, but you certainly do not have to. You should try to get some publications though. I mean, obviously that's difficult as a med student, but a lot of programs, if you get so many applicants, a lot more than you can interview, there are certain things you sort of look through to see who you're going to make time to interview. And it may not always be fair, but places will look at numbers of publications and look at board scores a little bit, not entirely, but at least a little. Because you kind of need to find some way to, get down to a decent number that you can interview, because you can't interview every single person who applies. And so if you can get at least a couple of publications, I mean, no one's expecting a Nature paper, but, a case report or a, review of something or a meta-analysis, some sort of paper that you can put together and show that you can get, a study that you can, do a lot for a study, learn how to write it up, get it published. And that allows you to get to know some of the residents or attendings at your program while you're doing that. And that would also improve your letters of recommendation. So, if you're not going to take a year, that's perfectly valid not to take a year. Financially, a lot of people just simply can't take another year off. or it's just, they really know what they want to do. And so they don't feel like they need that extra year to make up their mind. So yeah, it's perfectly fine to go through without an extra year off. Just do try to get some publications and try to get to know the people in your program so you can get good letters of recommendation from them.
Yeah, the main reason I took a year off was because I didn't have a good research portfolio, and I didn't feel like I was really putting my best foot forward in terms of applying. And I was trying to avoid applying with a weaker application and just seeing what happens. So it's all based, I think, on your experience, how strong your application is, or your resume in general, and then how supported you feel, in applying. Like if you have those relationships, if you have any sort of mentors or residents who you can connect with, it was so much better for me to go into the application cycle with the support of certain people and certain letters saying, like, we believe in this person, you should too.
Okay, to tie on that, do you have any recommendations for a first-year med student on how to look into research years?
The easiest would be at your own home program. Talk to the attendings in that program, see what labs they have, see what opportunities there are within your program. Outside of that, whatever section of neurosurgery interests you most at this time, you can look at the individual, like vascular section, pediatric section, different sections within neurosurgery. Sometimes their websites or their meetings will have opportunities. Emailing people. I've gotten plenty of times, I've gotten just emails from people I've never met, or people who saw my name on a website and said, hey, do you have an opportunity? I'm at a school that doesn't have research. And usually I can help them find someone in their city or, at their, location who can help them get a research program for the year.
I think the benefit of knowing that you want to go into neurosurgery as a first-year med student is that you have time to do research. So you don't necessarily need to take a research year, especially like Dr. Mew said, if you get involved in your home program or a local hospital or lab, then you can do a lot by the time that you apply. And then you won't necessarily feel that pressure of doing research here. Or if you start early and you realize you do want to take a research year because you want to dedicate more of your time to that, then that could even shift you towards pursuing a PhD or some sort of like extra degree before going to residency or during medical school. So your options are even like more open if you start early, I think.
Yeah, I also think that in the first 2 years of medical school, at least for me, it was difficult to be fruitful research-wise, just because we were in a pandemic, so it was difficult to do anything. But it was also just difficult to balance like all of the schoolwork that you had with the research. But this year, I'm finding I have a lot more time that I can dedicate to research projects. And I find that the more interested I am in neurosurgery, the more energy that I have to give to doing more research. So I wouldn't be so worried about it if you weren't as productive as you wanted the first 2 years, because I think that you can make up for it if you want to. So yeah, that's also another way of putting it if you don't want to take a research year. Okay, so what's your advice to medical students in terms of extracurricular activities, fellowships, shadowing, rotations, attending conferences, and so forth to increase chance to match?
Do as much as you can. Obviously you need to have decent grades to get through school, but if you have time or the opportunity to go to conferences or get to meet some of the attendings in the program or spend time with some of the residents to see what their daily life is like, it's definitely a great experience to do that, because it really lets you see what life will be like later, and it lets you make relationships, and neurosurgery is a small enough world that, a lot of us will know the people who wrote your letters, and Sometimes we'll call each other and say, hey, you'll really like so-and-so. Or, when I had my residency, I had never been to Georgia, so I hadn't really ever even considered, matching down in the South. And Don Quest, who was my mentor at Columbia, said, you're going to love this guy, Dan Barrow. He's amazing. He's the chairman at Emory. You and him will get along so well. You have to go interview down there. And it never even would have occurred to me. And I loved it. He was right. I love Dr. Barrow. I love the whole program. And it never would have occurred to me if I hadn't gotten to know Dr. Quest well enough for him to know me and my personality and have him tell me places that he thought I would like. And so getting to know the attendings or the residents in your program, I think is very helpful. If they're supportive, because you can, ask them what different programs are like, what places will, you think I fit in well. If you're someone who really wants to do research all the time, then there are some very research heavy residencies. If you're someone who has no interest in research and really just wants to operate, there are some more operative heavy residencies. And getting to know, the attendings in your program will really help you figure that out when it's time to make your list later.
Okay, so I guess this question's for me, but it's saying, how do you structure your days to do more research while on your third year rotations? So basically, I just came from my month of neurosurgery. So I have been trying to kind of stay on that schedule, just like I'm not waking up at 4:30, but I'm waking up like before 6 and hopefully doing things before I have to go to my rotation. So I have to be at the hospital by like 8:45. So I wake up and I just make sure I have those 2 hours to kind of do whatever I need to do for whichever research project I'm choosing for that day. And so that's how I do that in the morning. And then I go to my rotation, and then later on I either have to study, or if I have time, then I do another project, or I try to finish one project. It just all, again, goes back to your priorities and what is important. And I think during the winter, it's also easier to be able to do all these things because you're not going to be really doing anything else. So that's what I've just been trying to do. So actually, Dr. Mew, on that note, we are drafting our manuscript for the TXA project. So hopefully it will be drafted by this weekend.
Oh, perfect. Good. That'll be awesome. I'm excited for that.
No, we've had a great team that we roped in, a few new students. So it's been very helpful.
Good. And that's actually an important point, is teamwork. You don't have to do a paper by yourself. You don't have to do research by yourself. We all know that you guys are busy, and you can definitely get a team together, get a bunch of other students together who are interested, and split up the work. That's still just as valid a study. It's just as valid a publication, and allows you to, get more publications potentially, because you can all help each other out.
I also think that goes back to the diversity thing that Dr. Rousseau was talking about earlier. Like, you're not going to be able to do everything yourself. And I think expanding your mindset about that will be really helpful, because I'm not really great at statistics. And at my other institutions, they've always had a statistician. So I've never had to worry about it. And then at Westchester, they don't. So actually having these students that know how to do meta-analyses has been really, really helpful, because I'm learning something and I'm able to delegate that to someone else. So I just think it really is great to have a team like that. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't know if we answered this one, but someone's saying, I'm an M2 and wondering when the most advantageous time to do research at this point to be a competitive neurosurgery applicant would be.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Whatever works for your schedule, whether you do a little bit throughout, whether you take a year. Mine was between third and fourth year of med school, but any time at all. Some people do it, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, whatever works best for your schedule.
Someone just sent this one. I thought we answered the first one, but maybe we didn't answer the second one. Do you feel that your long journey of training has made you jaded? If so, how did you combat that?
For me, no. I can let Monica answer as well. I don't think I'm jaded. I think I'm still I'm certainly not as boppy and happy and smiley as I was when I was 20, but I think that happens with age somewhat, not having slept well for 47 years. But, I mean, I still think I'm a happy person. I don't think I'm jaded or bitter.
I'd say that's true.
I agree. No, I don't think I wouldn't consider myself jaded. I definitely notice when I'm more or less irritable. I think that's a consequence of, like Dr. Mew alluded to, sleep deprivation. But I think the more important thing is that I've noticed that I'm proud of what I do, and I'm proud that I'm in this place in my life, and of my accomplishments, even as like a PGY2. So yes, your job can be frustrating, and it's not the easiest thing to work in a hospital, whether that's here or anywhere else. And you're going to end up doing a lot of things that you don't think you necessarily are expected to do, or what you feel like may be other people's jobs. And yes, that can be frustrating, but no, I don't think I wouldn't say I'm jaded.
Well, that's great. Okay, so I guess we only have a few more minutes left, but I guess with these last few minutes, do you have any last minute pearls that you could give to the audience about how to kind of navigate through this journey? How to find, I mean, we've touched upon how to find mentors, but just like any last minute tidbits.
Don't hesitate to reach out. If you have attendings in your program, send them an email. Say you want to, get involved in neurosurgery. You want to help them out with research projects. No one's going to be offended that you're reaching out. They'll be excited that you're interested in what they do. When you do meet with mentors, try to be sort of somewhat prepared in terms of, try to look up and see, what they do and, maybe what some of their specialties are. So you can ask them specific questions or tell them individual projects, or what kinds of projects, if you don't know enough to say a specific, you'd like to be involved in. Show interest. No one's going to be offended that you want to be in the OR or that you want to shadow. So it's okay to speak up and say it's what you want to do. And people should be supportive of that. And if they're not, find other people who are.
I think I second all of that. And I think that it's important to realize, or just remember that from the minute that you decide you want to go into neurosurgery, you're already stepping out of your comfort zone. So if you're really into this, then just stick with it. And there are going to be a lot of many more moments where you may feel uncomfortable, or you're stepping on other people's toes, or you're really out of your comfort zone, or, you're just bothering someone by emailing them. But don't hesitate, and don't hesitate to reach out. Don't limit yourself by not doing something. I think one of the earliest things I learned, and something that I stick to this day, is that if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So all you have to do is put yourself out there and let the pieces fall. Work hard, of course, and be prepared, and show that you care, and try to do your best every day. But it's very obvious, even like to residents, to attendings, it's really to anyone, when someone is present and is appreciative of, just having the opportunity to be where they are. And I think we love to see that. We love to see the passion and the dedication, and the excitement. So try to, follow that feeling.
Thank you guys so much. This was great. Really enjoyed seeing both of you and getting to have this like really honest conversation. Oh yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing your contacts, or I can share them if you guys are okay with that. Some people are asking.
Yeah. It's carrie.mew@wmchealth.org. So first name dot last name at WMC will get basically any of us. But yeah, you're absolutely welcome to email me.
I thought I had texted it out, but maybe did that not send?
No, it's sent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe you can just
I'll copy paste it.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So, let's see. But same as Dr. Mew, first name dot last name at wmchealth.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank Jared for
Definitely.
taking the pager.
I
Monica.
actually kept it, but I'll thank him anyway. All right, bye. Nice
Bye.
meeting
See you later.
you.
All right, Dr. Pannullo, hello.
Hi, just it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. So when you do that, I'll be on in my face. There I go. Now I'm a co-host, so now I can. There we go. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So I think that, oh, good. Perfect. Sergio's right on time. So he only has a few minutes, but he wanted to discuss with everyone like the opportunities that we have. And
Actually, we're going to do that toward the end because I'm going to segue into him. He and I have been working that out on the back end.
oh, okay, perfect.
And then I think the flow wise, I think actually that everybody will be inspired, I hope, to do all of the things with you guys at MSNTC once I've talked a little bit about why that's so great. So Sergio's going to chime in around 12:30, and then at 12:45 we'll start questions and answers so we can be on track for the panel at 1.
Perfect. That sounds like a great idea. All right, so I will introduce you to the group, although I'm sure plenty of them know who you are. So Dr. Pannullo is the Director of Neurosurgical Radiosurgery and Neuro-Oncology at the Weill Cornell Brain and Spine Center. She's a neurosurgeon and a neuro-oncologist, both board certified in neurosurgery and neurology, and is fellowship trained in neuro-oncology. She's one of the few neurosurgeons in the world with a neurosurgical practice focused only on stereotactic radiosurgery, and one of the few neurosurgeons in the country with access to 3 different technologies: Novalis, Gamma Knife, and CyberKnife. In addition to her clinical practice, she serves in leadership positions in several important institutional and national organizations, including the Weill Cornell Institutional Review Board, the National Brain Tumor Society, the American Association of Neurosurgical Neurological Surgeons, and the Brain Tumor Foundation, and is our great mentor here at the MSNTC. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Devin. So I'm going to start by just contextualizing this and telling you a little bit of the spicy path that I took into this. So it'll just, I think, give you guys a little bit of an idea about, some of you have been concerned about, can you do neurosurgery? It's always something that dogs medical students. So I'll just start out the story by telling you that when I was asking about being a neurosurgeon, people kind of laughed when I was in medical school, and I was a little bit tone deaf, having been raised in a gender agnostic household. I flew a plane, and I just kind of did anything that I was in a rock band. Nobody really talked about things that were appropriate or not for a girl. So I was a little bit surprised when I started talking about wanting to be a neurosurgeon, and people literally laughed and they said, well, girls don't do that. Like, what a dumbass question. And in fact, when I took the time to look around outside of my insular little medical school world, I realized that there weren't a whole lot of women that were neurosurgeons. And I was kind of born and raised around the same time as Dr. Rousseau. So there really were literally a handful in the world of female neurosurgeons. So I applied to neurology residency. Actually, I didn't really apply. They just said, you're going to be a neurologist. And I got sucked into the vortex of a neurology residency, which was not a bad thing. It was great. But I was told that I'm going to be a neurologist, and that was how it was going to go down. And they took me into the program at Cornell. So there wasn't actually applying to anything. I just did it. And the whole time I kept saying that I was going to be a neurosurgeon, and thanks a lot for all this cool neurology training. In fact, it was awesome. But I just kept saying that this was going to happen eventually. So as I got toward the end of my medical school time and then residency, I found excuses to be in the operating room, and something that I would definitely recommend that you guys do, which is to just be present, be in people's faces. I tell our medical students all the time, and Sergio knows this, especially in Zoom, you Zoom bomb every conference that you can, so that they just feel like you're just already working there. So it came to the point during my neurology residency where it pretty much was that I was doing a lot of neurosurgery. And in those days, you could do stuff like that. I would just show up at operations, and if they were one person short, the residents were all busy, they'd just let me scrub in. Anyway, so I asked the chairman of neurosurgery if he would ever hire a woman. He said no. And I said, thank you, kind of packed up my bags to walk out of the room. But then he said, I would hire you, whatever that meant, I guess, like that, not like I was an actual girl. And so they did. They mapped out a path to have me as the first female neurosurgery resident and then graduate from the Cornell neurosurgery program. So that was a little bit weird. Then when I finished my residency, I actually took off a year and a half, which was also completely like unheard of. And I was quite sure that that was the end of my medical career, that nobody would ever take me seriously. In fact, nobody could care less. It was as if I took the weekend off to, take a vacation. Nobody cared. And I went back on track with that. The reason for that was the, I guess, preparation for pregnancy and then getting pregnant with the third baby. So I had a child in, I guess, the end of my first residency. And in fact, there was a rule that you weren't allowed to get pregnant in neurology residency. So I broke that rule. You could say those things in those days. And then I had one during my neurosurgery residency that was also immensely unpopular. And I was told that if I had another baby during residency, I was not going to finish residency. Then I had the third baby when I took this year off. And then the fourth one was actually kind of the most disruptive when I was an attending, because there's not as much overlap. Like if there's a second resident, well, they don't care. Just like two female residents get mixed up with each other. It was the same in residency. One's all the same as another. So it just kind of doesn't matter. But when you have a neurosurgical specialty as narrow as I do, then people kind of notice when you've gone missing. So I had my fourth baby then. Anyway, that's to give you a little bit of context about, what it's like to kind of grow up as a neurosurgeon, if in fact I've grown up yet. But so I am in an academic institution. And as Devin was kind enough to intro, I work in a kind of traditional academic environment, and I do a good amount of work in organized neurosurgery. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about leadership in those settings and, kind of opportunities, what it's like, what to think about. And I guess I'll start that off by just saying that you can do a lot to lead in your own institution as a neurosurgeon. And that starts when you're a medical student, and the medical student chapters or the medical student interest groups or the Cushing societies or whatever you guys have in your local institutions are an important opportunity for you to kind of cut your teeth on neurosurgical local leadership. And it's a great thing to be able to lead in those situations. The opportunities then can scale up to other things, but really it starts local. Just like, people talk about politics, it's all local. Then you can have positions in your department as an attending where you're a clinical leader and you can drive clinical leadership opportunities. In my situation, when I came in, I kind of set it up so that I could run two clinical programs. I run the neuro-oncology program in my department and the radiosurgery program in my department. And so those give me titles that protect your time a little bit, that give you a chance to, create and mold programs the way that you want them to be molded. You can take on teaching roles in your department. You have opportunities to teach medical students, residents, and in fact, other faculty. And that's a really great thing to do, again, locally. And also, medical students can do that. I often will invite medical students who are excited, interested, and have something to say to come and present at conferences that we have. And you get to put it on your resume, your CV, which you're building. And it looks like it's an invited lectureship, which it is. You're there being invited. So you can, by making yourself known and by making yourself present and have some expertise in something, you can be of value, even as a medical student locally in your department, to have a valuable role in teaching. We also try, when we have these continuing medical education courses, a secret piece of data is that the CME organizers, they really want to have a hierarchical organization of the people that are teaching and organizing this course. It goes into the applications that the faculty make for these courses. So when your neurosurgery department in your institution is trying to create a neurosurgery course, they really want to have medical students on the list of the organizers and the speakers. And it might be that you're the introducer of a speaker, or you might be the one telling everybody to fill out your CME forms. But now you've been a faculty essentially in a CME course. So that also looks really good. In terms of research, Sergio knows this. There's in many institutions now, there's carve outs for the exceptions for the limits that are now often imposed on academic institutions on how many research protocols faculty can have running, because there's just not enough resources, especially in COVID. It really decimated the research workforce. So medical students who are leading projects, who are leading especially like chart review kind of projects, those get fast tracked through the system of being able to do clinical trials. So you can lead even as a medical student locally in research. And then administratively, you can have important positions in your department, that invaluable roles in the department administration. And again, even as a medical student, if you construct something, think about it, your local medical student chapters, or, again, whatever you want to call it, those groups are administrative groups that have functions. You invite faculty to come and do things. You have, in the olden days, we had, parties and stuff. You can get those things together. You can organize conferences. Those are important local administrative roles. And again, even in your institution, you can do that. And of course, that's not limited to just women, but women have a tendency to be able to like to do these kinds of things. It's in our DNA. And so you can, basically capture that positive and be able to do that in your institution. Beyond neurosurgery in your institution, same kind of thing. So surgeons in general, interestingly, are valued members of leadership teams. They think surgeons are busy, because we are, and they think it's kind of special to be a neurosurgeon, because it is. And so when you volunteer to do things, pretty much always you'll get picked. Or when people ask, they want somebody special on a committee, they'll ask you because you're a neurosurgeon, and they think, again, it's not incorrect, that you might be smart and you might be, organized and be able to be decisive. And sometimes I'll apologize in disciplinary, multi-specialty committees. I'll say, hey, I'm going to be in surgical here, but let's just stop talking, because the meeting's going on for, 59 of the 60 minutes and nothing's gotten done. And I'll say, can we just do this? And people kind of look, and they'll give you that vibe because you're a neurosurgeon. But you have opportunities, and even being a neurosurgically minded medical student, people will give you that little bit of a cord, because they know that you're that kind of person. And it's, almost stereotyping, but there is, we can have lip gloss and nail polish and whatever we want, and wear pink sweaters. And I got today pink glasses. That was pretty exciting. So you can have all these feminine qualities, but still be strong. And in some ways, it actually catches people's attention even more when you're exerting your talents and expertise outside of the neurosurgical space. Because in a neurosurgical space, that's kind of everybody's like that, right? But when you go outside of that, you stand out a little bit more, and you can utilize that in a good way. It's not cheating. It's utilizing the skill sets that make you interested in neurosurgery and the accord that you're provided because you're a neurosurgeon, and kind of use that to your advantage. Beyond your institution, within neurosurgery, Dr. Rousseau alluded to that a couple of times in her talk. There's so many opportunities for women to enter leadership positions in our various neurosurgical organizations. So the organized neurosurgery end of this talk is about that. It's being able to contribute and give meaning to what we do by being involved in things like the AANS, like the CNS, like the Council of State Neurosurgical Societies, like the specialty sections and the specialty societies that populate the world of neurosurgery. They like volunteerism. It's a culture of neurosurgery that people really like. As you've heard from pretty much every speaker, people love what they do. It's kind of my hobby. I like what I do. It's freaking Saturday and it's 55 degrees out in New Jersey today. And, and I'm kind of happy to be doing this. So we like what we do. And so we like to volunteer, and neurosurgery is full of volunteerism. As a medical student, there are opportunities within all of these organizations hidden sometimes in like little subcommittees and stuff where you can find those cracks in the door that Dr. Rousseau talked about, where you can just kind of get your way in and work your talents within the organization of a subspecialty, and sometimes get a crummy little job to begin with in it, but you can then keep working and show value. And of course, it's fun. It's not all about, brown nosing and getting your CV populated. It's about enjoying what you're doing, creating value. And each thing that you do makes you even more interested in the next thing that you do. And you branch out, and it's just really interesting beyond just, cutting people's heads open or spines open or whatever, people think neurosurgeons really do. And then outside of both your institution and neurosurgery, there are so many opportunities in your communities to work, say, in nonprofits. I volunteered for the National Brain Tumor Society, and I served on their board of directors. And there are medical student groups within all of these organizations, some of the head trauma organizations, whatever your area of interest might be. But you can use these nonprofits. And, as a medical student, don't think that just like when you went to medical school, remember there was sections for community service on your application and in your CV that you needed to put community service. Nobody wants somebody that's just, serving in a soup kitchen because it looks good, but you can really find meaningful ways to exercise your neurosurgical talents and your neurosurgical demeanor in these organizations, and even in organizations that are in your community that have nothing to do with, and Sergio's throwing in about WNS opportunities. So even in your communities, not necessarily related to medicine, again, because you're a physician because you're going to be a physician, because you're going to be a neurosurgeon, people value your time even more than normal people. They'll value what you do. And so, a neurosurgeon might serve on a concussion panel for the, concerned moms for the football team in the town. These are things that you can really add value in your community in life as a neurosurgeon, because people accord you a certain level of respect in a bizarre way. It's like being a member of clergy. And that analogy, it really includes not just the respect that you are accorded in the community, but really also, the commitment to a lifestyle. Like, you're always a neurosurgeon wherever you go. You are always a neurosurgeon, even if you don't identify it as that. Once people hear that, it just changes the game. So let's talk a little bit about, I think I'm going to give myself about 10, 15 more minutes at most, so I can let Sergio chime in and then allow some questions, because I know you guys have been asking some really good questions. So as you're getting your career in academic neurosurgery going, and remember, you guys are all in medical school, you're all in academic environments, so you're all being raised in academic culture, and you statistically will likely wind up there. Even people that go out into private practice, ultimately, those neurosurgeons still go to academic meetings, they still write papers. That academic flavor is still run through their life, and they still often participate in organized neurosurgery organizations. The Council of State Neurosurgical Societies, for example, is full of kind of grassroots neurosurgeons. That's where it came from. The lines become very blurred in your career. So as you're looking to grow as a neurosurgeon in an academic career and a organized neurosurgical life, as in both figuratively and literally organized neurosurgery, in some ways being an oxymoron, but sometimes it's a little bit chaotic, but organized neurosurgery as in organizations, but also organized neurosurgery is having your life, putting things, being strategic, being smart. So you really need to, as you've heard from some of the mentor discussions that have gone on before this, is accept help and always help others. There's been no shortage of both female and male neurosurgeons that have helped me to get things done that I needed to get done, and helped me put me in positions that I didn't even know I should have been in. And again, it's been both men and women, but I can say that the women have been the most sensitive, most strategic, and most pushy in a good way about that. So an example is Dr. Edie Zussman, who's a neurosurgeon in California, she got me somehow nominated to be in leadership structure of women in neurosurgery. That led to a series of events that culminated in me becoming the president, which is now known as the chair of a section of the women in neurosurgery, and then helped to basically push me along that track so that I was one of the few women neurosurgeons on the board of directors of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. Dr. Deborah Benzel, who's a neurosurgeon in Cleveland and a vice chair there, she literally pushed me. She took me behind me when somebody was asking for volunteer, somebody couldn't show up for some committee thing that was needed, which the committee actually sat in front of the room and hundreds of people and like talked on this committee. So she literally took me and I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Just go." And she shoved me and I went like that. And then I was asked to sit and they sat me down and there I was in front of a room, and all of a sudden you become, somebody that people knows their name. They see your name tag, they hear your name. So people really pushing you and helping you, like let them shove you. Dr. Marasco, who is the chair and actually was for a very long time, was the only chair that was a female at University of Michigan. She helped me to get into a formal leadership program called the Executive Leadership and Academic Medicine program, which is a really, really hard thing to get into. And she pushed to help me to get the verbiage into my application to get me accepted. Dr. Rousseau has put me in favorable positions more times than I can count. We all help each other out. You always want to, conversely, look for opportunities to put someone else in a leadership position when you have a chance. These opportunities come in random ways often, and sometimes in formal ways. Somebody, just like there was that opening all of a sudden, if you hear about something, put somebody up for it. It's sometimes a woman needs it a little bit more help than a man. Traditionally, that was how it was. I mentor and coach probably as many men as women, but I do notice that sometimes women are a little bit less forthcoming in suggesting themselves self-nominating, and you need to make sure that you help others when they might not be helping themselves. You want to leverage leadership training opportunities. These can be institutional based and also, in your future, they may be larger, like this ELAM program that I got to do, but really take advantage of your neurosurgery medical student group and beyond. And again, MSNTC is a great example for how medical students can lead. You guys are self-governing. You are doing visible, productive things. And I'll let, again, Sergio talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but I really respect what you guys have taken this to. It's just absolutely remarkable. And this is the neurosurgical culture, the volunteerism, the train the trainer, train each other. It's great. In academic publishing, it's so important to publish papers. I probably didn't realize that till later on, that a lot of getting promoted is people literally just count how many publications you have. So it's not a minor thing to publish. And there's data to show that women are often not invited to publish, to be writers on a journal article as much as men are. And there's less women that publish, and therefore your CV will have less publications on it. So you need to, when you have an opportunity, ask one more person on, another woman, another man. But again, women may just need that little bit of an extra push. I had an opportunity to give grand rounds at an Ivy League medical school recently. And instead of just going up because it was up as in Zoom, I was able to say, hey, you know what, like, let's not have it just be me. How about we bring two other people, one of whom was a junior faculty member that I mentor. And I had two other people come up and give grand rounds with me. All three of us now have grand rounds, at neurosurgery grand rounds at this, Ivy League institution. So you want to always just pull people up with you. There's no harm. It can only accrue benefit. I always tell women especially, and again, men too, to be resilient. You're going to be bullied. I get bullied, I would probably say 3 times a week in my job. It was always like that. In my residency, it was like that. It was a big joke that I was going to be the one that was going to put in all the ventriculostomies. And in those days, there was no mechanical drills to do it. We had to do it by hand. It was really hard work. And it was like a big joke to make me do every VIN trick, and I would just run around the hospital. But, you then show up and you're smiling, and then, they put your lip gloss on. I always tell the women, like, get up in the morning, no matter how much you got beat up the night before, take a shower, put the lip gloss on, and show up again. And you'll get beat up even more because of that, but you're going to feel good still when you get up and do that. Be very prepared for women in academic medicine and women in organized neurosurgery, for people to say you only got something because you're a woman. I've been on so many committees that I was told, and in leadership positions that I was told that, you only got to do that because you're a woman. And I would go, probably they were looking around when they needed that like dirty subcommittee to do some position paper on something, and nobody wanted to do it. And they said, like, how about like, we need a woman. It's all a bunch of guys. Let's like look like we're including women. And they'd put me on that. And then you take leadership, you do a really good job. Next, you're put on the actual subcommittee. Then you're on the committee. Then, because you're still working hard and doing the work and being productive, then you're the chair of that committee. And then you're the chair and the chief of the organization. So probably there have been situations where people needed a female and they said, like, what are we going to do? It doesn't look so good that there's not any women on here. We need a woman neurosurgeon. And of course, there's not a lot to choose from. So they pick the few of us that are around. And it probably does start that way sometimes. But what they can't take credit for is having me do that without having done all the work that's involved in still being able to escalate from there. But you can always retort with that. The coaching, advisor, mentoring thing that came up a bunch of times, I want to make sure that I address that in academic neurosurgery and in organizational organized neurosurgery. So you really do always want to be on the lookout for potential mentors, advisor, coaches. I don't think that the structure of the old days, especially for women, because we change a lot during our careers and in terms of our needs. I don't think that having like one advisor or mentor is really either necessary or good. You want to pick people up along the way that will help you, and you'll spy them at things and ask them, and they may be done with you at some point. They don't have to be stuck with you the whole time either, and you don't have to be stuck with them. As you need something, pull in. I consider them coaches. I don't really like the word mentors. I don't like the word advisors. I like the word coaches because I notice I have 4 boys, ironically, and I watch my boys as they get coached. And it looks very different from the conversations that you have as just, being mentored. It's sometimes the mentorship situation gets a little messy. There's expectations. You're writing the papers. They're the author. That's sometimes part of the teaching experience. But I think coaching is really better. It's like honest, blunt advice in the background. I think you should also look for secret mentors and coaches. They force us at the medical college as faculty to put all of the people that we mentor. And I don't like that. Some of them I don't even put there because I don't want people to know that I'm mentoring them. And so sometimes you want secret ones. Interestingly, when they've done studies sometimes of mentors and mentees, there's a complete disconnect between who each other thinks is what. So sometimes people don't even know that they mentored somebody and somebody's identified as them as being their mentor. And conversely, sometimes somebody's done so much mentoring and nobody even recognizes that they've been mentored. So it's very interesting how that goes. But really assemble a group. I know Dr. Rousseau used the term personal board of directors. I don't like to necessarily have everybody know who's helping me out. I'm always grateful to them, but it's not necessarily public information. So I think it's really crucial, but you don't need to advertise that. Academic institutions are kind of funny places, funny cultures. You are expected to operate within a certain norm, and I don't discourage that. You have to behave a certain way sometimes. You can definitely be yourself. You can definitely be happy and light and fluffy. That's totally fine. You need to be true to yourself. You need to be yourself. People will eventually accept that. I think it's kind of confusing often for traditional, especially in traditional academic medicine. to figure out where families come in, all this, where you're going to have all these kids and do all this stuff. And it works out. It just works out. And you just kind of have to be honest about your limitations and what you can and can't do. See if there's anything else. I guess the last thing that I want to talk about is that your story might wind up being a little bit different than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. Your path might look different. That's totally fine. I think you need to have humor about it. You need to be blunt and bold about it. I was thinking when I heard the story about, being called a nurse all the time. First of all, I think nurses are great, but it is a little bit odd. I was at doing, I specialize in radiosurgery. I was at our Gamma Knife on Thursday with a case, and I went up with the patient. The neurosurgeon doesn't always go up with the patient to MRI, but the patient was a little bit sleepy from the medication. She was elderly. I was a little worried about her. So I went up to MRI and I sat in the chair in the MRI suite, and the lady was getting her IV in and stuff. And I was sitting there on my phone, kind of, probably writing this talk and doing work on my phone. And when the patient went into the MRI, the nurse that was in the MRI suite said to me, "Okay, so I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go to the waiting room." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Well, you can't sit here while the patient's in the MRI." And I was like really confused. I was like, waiting room, where am I going? And then all of a sudden I realized, and I said, and I didn't want to be mean to her. So I said, "I'm about to make you laugh really hard." And she said, "What?" And I said, "I'm the neurosurgeon." There's no other women neurosurgeons at that hospital that I was at. And of course she turned bright red. She was so upset, so embarrassed. It was another woman. And I said, "I told you, you're going to laugh. This is funny." I said, "It doesn't bother me. It's funny." She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were a family member. I thought you were the daughter, whatever." I was like, "I don't care. It's totally fine." You have to have humor about stuff like that. People will always mistake you for something else. Outside of the hospital, I insist on being called Mrs. Pannullo. And the parents tell their kids to call me Dr. Pannullo. And I say, there's nothing about being a doctor picking you up with my son to go to play on the playground. That's not a doctor job. That's a mom job. That's a Mrs. Pannullo job. If you need me to do brain surgery on you someday, hopefully never, that's a Dr. Pannullo job. You can call me Dr. Pannullo then. But you have to have humor in your life. And especially as a woman, you have to just expect that people are going to say bizarre, snarky, sometimes mean things to you. And you just have to laugh, and it's okay. So I'm going to stop there because I really want to give Sergio the opportunity to talk a little bit about this awesome group that you guys have. For those of you who are not familiar with the work that MSNTC does and the opportunities in leadership and what it can do for your neurosurgical career. And then I'll take questions after that. So go for it, Sergio.
Thanks so much, Dr. Pannullo. So many great takeaways from that talk. One of them being, I did not know you were in a rock band, apparently. We got to talk about this more offline. But yeah, thank you for the wonderful lead in. So I'll just briefly talk about what opportunities there are at Brain and Spine Group, and specifically with our MSNTC, so that you guys can get involved in. So, Dr. Pannullo was talking a lot about organized neurosurgery. And, Brain and Spine Group, like she said, is a, student-run nonprofit organization specifically focused on, neurosurgery education at the early trainee level, including primarily medical students. So as a part of that, you guys here are a part of our audience of, legions of medical students who are interested in, what we're providing in terms of education. And that, obviously makes us a part of organized neurosurgery. So within that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about, the different departments that we have and how you might be able to get involved. So first being our education programming side of things. So this is really the backbone of our organization. So, the structure we have now for this is that, there are junior directors and senior student directors of education, and the junior directors really spend a year with us, formalizing and proposing different educational sessions to really shape our MSNTC curriculum. So they'll, put together things like what we're doing now with Women in Neurosurgery, like a weekend webinar, also our seminar series, virtual trainings, virtual training camps, in-person training camps, and our, other creative sessions like our spine summits that we've hosted before. So right now we have our senior student directors, Nathan and Alvin at the top there that I'm showing. And on the, over here, we have Divine, Devin, and Michael, who are working as our junior directors. Hopefully they'll want to stay on for, to be a senior student director. And so to fill in those gaps, we'll be looking for additional junior directors. And I've placed an application on our website that I'll show you how to navigate to a little bit later. But, one of the benefits of becoming a junior director, first of all, you'll understand what it really takes to host a lot of these educational sessions and to really take shape, make a curriculum take shape for the rest of your, fellow peers. But also for all these sessions, you'll work very closely with our neurosurgery faculty directors. So I've shown a couple of them down there, of course, leading off with Dr. Pannullo, Dr. Jeremiah Johnson, Nader Dodele, and Dr. David Hirsch. So all of the educational sessions that we host, first have to go through them and make sure that they have eyes on it and that they approve the educational sessions that we're hosting, so that these are high yield informational events for, people going into their neurosurgery sub-Is, people just trying to get a little bit more of a flavor of neurosurgery, and even for early trainees in, internship, for example. So this is definitely a great benefit of working in our education programming side of things in terms of facilitating connections with the greater, organized neurosurgery. So I would highly consider, I would highly suggest that you guys consider joining. Now for the rest of our departments, so grants, I actually started in Brain and Spine Group before I went on to a senior student director of education and the executive director, which I am right now. I started off in the grants department as the director of grant acquisition. And as a part of that team, you gain a lot of experience in grant writing, but this is sort of multifactorial. So one of them being, you make sure that we're getting funded as a nonprofit organization by partnering with, those, corporations in industry and other nonprofits. So people like the Integra Foundation and Olympus. And so you'll be writing grants to sort of facilitate those connections. And then the second part is, we conduct a lot of research ourselves in neurosurgery education. And so we would want to be writing grants all the time, the same way you would write a research grant. I mean, it's not necessarily an R01 grant, of course, but it's, within that space. And so that would give you a lot of, experience in terms of what it takes to put a grant proposal together. Along with that, you'll obviously learn a lot about the ins and outs in terms of the financials with our organization. So you'll work closely with our CFO and our budgets office to make sure that, where we need to be in terms of sustainability of our organization and something to facilitate our interactions with the rest of our industry partners. And of course, that'll help us keep us funded and sustainable, for the foreseeable future. As a part of our fundraising team, again, this is a similar role in terms of, making sure that we're able to be funded and, maintain our mission of serving you guys as a sort of nonprofit organization. As a part of the team, you'll be able to lead fundraising campaigns like our Giving Tuesday that we host annually. You'll be maintaining relationships with our many donors and helping facilitate new relationships with other donors. And you'll really be able to cultivate a sense of community with our MSNTC audience. So examples of, creative events that we've hosted before include like virtual trivia nights, Race for Neurosurgery Education that we host annually. And of course, all of this will be crucial in order to help us maintain sustainability. So you would be a really essential part of our team. In terms of the other stuff we have going on, like social media, graphic design, and video production team. So these are really the workhorses in a great sense of our organization. So they're working on a daily basis to make sure that we have all our marketing posts and promotional materials going out again on a daily basis on all our different social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You'll be able to engage with the fellow students on our listserv and all our subscribers, as a part of this team. And really, if you're in any one of these teams, you'll be working very closely with a lot of different departments that we have pretty much across all of them. So for example, if you're in the graphic design team, you'll be working closely with the education programming side of things to make sure that we have nice graphics and promotional materials for the events that we'll be hosting they're sort of upcoming. Same thing for social media and video production. And this will really help expand our reach domestically and globally as we want to continue expanding our audience. As a part of video production, you'll also be helping manage our video library and our YouTube channel, of which we have over 5,000 subscribers. And this will really, as a part of this team, you're essentially making sure that all these resources and all these sessions that we're hosting are recorded in perpetuity, so that the rest of your peers and people who come after you who are interested in neurosurgery really have access to all of these educational materials. So that's extremely important. So as a part of our education resources team, so this is led mainly by Mike Kortz, who's on the top left there. And we have a lot of things going on in this department, a couple of them being the Neurosurgeon's Journey podcast that is hosted by Mike Kortz and Jeremiah Johnson. As well, we have an upcoming research symposium on March 12th. That's going to have many big names in neurosurgery, including David Daniels out at Mayo and Michael Lapuzzo, who's been everywhere as a neurosurgical pioneer. So if you haven't registered for that, I would definitely take the time to go ahead and register. It's going to be great. But as far as getting involved in the things that we're doing there, so we're always looking for junior writers to get involved with Brain and Spine Report, which is our publication. And as a junior writer, you'll really get a feel for the peer review process in working with our editorial board. You'll also be able to hone your skills in expository writing, but also scientific and manuscript writing. So we publish a lot of things, including like faculty spotlights, residency program spotlights, but also a little bit more technical pieces and educational materials like our Introduction to Neuroimaging for Medical Students that was published recently. So all of this would really help hone your skills as a writer and really help you as you become an academic neurosurgeon or throughout your medical school career. The other thing we have going on is our Nerve Interest Group. So this is a group that was put together specifically for disadvantaged medical students, and in particular, especially those students who do not have a home neurosurgery program. So of course, these kinds of students don't really have the access to neurosurgery faculty and other research resources that students typically have if they're partnered with a home neurosurgery institution. So as a part of this group, you'll really have access to practical skills workshops that we host, a variety of journal clubs that you'll be able to present, and as well as very important faculty coaching. As Dr. Pannullo said, this is always extremely important, and we do like to think of it in terms as coaching, both with faculty and residents on a one-to-one basis. So if this is something that interests you, if you're a student without a home neurosurgery program or otherwise would like to be involved, you'll be able to do that on our student resources page that I'll show you soon. So I told you a bunch of different ways to get involved with us, spanning from our education programming to grants, fundraising, social media, video production, education resources, etc. Now the question really is, if you do want to get involved, how do you make that happen? So one, the place to start always is to visit our MSNTC website. You can visit brainandspinegroup.org and then navigate to the MSNTC, or go directly to neurosurgerytraining.org, which is the MSNTC website. And so from there, if you're interested in getting involved in the education resources side of things like a Brain and Spine Report and NERV, you can then navigate to our Student Resources tab. If you're interested in becoming a junior director, you can go to the Volunteer tab, and there's a formal application for you guys to fill out. If you're interested in volunteering just in general with our organization, you don't know necessarily what you would want to volunteer in, but you just want to be involved, there's also a general volunteer application on that same tab that you navigate to volunteer, and you'll be able to see it. And otherwise, again, we're a nonprofit organization. We really rely on the generosity of our grant partners and also our donors. So if you have the means, or if you want to acquaint other peers with what we're doing, please consider either donating to our cause or subscribing to our YouTube channel. And you can do this by visiting our support page. As you can see there are many different ways that you can, help us in our mission, including donating, following us on our social media, volunteering with us in any capacity that you can. No, prior experience is necessary. Looking at our video library and subscribing to our YouTube channel. So, above all, thank you for joining us today for the Women in Neurosurgery weekend webinar. I really hope to see you guys at the other sessions that we host throughout the year, which have been crafted expertly by our junior directors and our senior directors of education programming. If there's anything that's unclear to you, if you're still unsure the best way to get involved, I've listed my email there, or I guess our director's email there. So please feel free to send over any questions at directors@neurosurgerytraining.org.
Thanks so much, Sergio. I really appreciate you jumping in to do that. I think it was just so good of an opportunity, and really was a good time to let these students know how meaningful the work is that's done by the MSNTC, and how honestly it can be helpful to your neurosurgical future careers. So thank you.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned before, this is entirely sort of grassroots, student run, beginning in 2019. We initially had something like, 500 subscribers at the beginning, and then now we've, over 5,000 something subscribers, just looking at our YouTube channel, for example. So this is just an example of how you really can build something from the ground up, even if you're still in med school, right? So it's a good example of that. And last thing, before you take any questions, I just wanted to say that, you've been a great mentor to me throughout, my medical school career so far, beginning all the way back in first year. So honestly, to all of you guys out there, Dr. Pannullo is the best mentor that you can possibly find. If you have any opportunities to work with her, please take advantage as much as you can, okay?
Thank you so much, Sergio. I really appreciate that. And I feel the same way about you. I think Sergio is a great leader and a really good example of how to get it done in neurosurgery. So I look forward to watching his career. So I'm going to field questions for the last, I think we have about 12 minutes until the next segment of the program. And I'm happy to take any questions from you guys. Anything you want to ask, personal, not personal, I don't care. Put it all out there.
So the first one I see is probably for Sergio, if you have time to answer it, but it says, do you have a group like NERV for international students?
As of right now, there's not a separate group set up for international students. However, I do think we do include international students within that group. If you would like to just get involved with them, please just navigate to the NERV's page on our website and send in a formal application, and then we'll get in touch with you, okay?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of everything that Sergio has said, obviously I'm one of the volunteers, and I think it's been like a really great experience. I started out in the fundraising department, and while I didn't really know that much about fundraising, it was great because it was the first year that we were kind of having a team do that. And so the Race for Neurosurgery was kind of my brainchild because I love to run and obviously love neurosurgery. And so it was a great way to put my own like personality into something that I really wanted to see other people join. So I think that this organization does that really well. And I think as a junior director of education, I get to put my spin on different educational resources. So like this Women in Neurosurgery webinar, I'm the only woman in our group right now. And it's just like really great to be able to be part of this today. And yeah, so I just really encourage everyone to volunteer if they have the time. Okay, someone's asking, do you ever feel that there is an expectation for you as a woman to always say yes? Also, how do you say no to adding more on your plate?
I'm still working on that. Really still working on that, which is why it's Saturday afternoon. And here, you know what, I actually generally don't mind saying yes. I find that we have more capacity than we realize, and usually there's a way to get it done. So somebody ask me something, I pretty much always say yes. If it's something that's really not a good idea, as in it's completely out of my skill set, I will at least help to get somebody else in that capacity, in that situation instead of me. But I always say yes in some way or another. So I don't find it hard because I don't usually do it. It's same with my kids.
I guess a lot of questions have been asked throughout the day, and I feel like you addressed a lot. So, oh, here they come. All right. What would you recommend for getting involved in research in medical school and beyond? I'm in graduate school studying spinal cord regeneration with plans of going into an MD in neurosurgery.
So you already are doing it, right? And that's a really good thing. I think if you find people who share your interests and you add value to their research team, you know, walking up to a neurosurgeon and saying, hey, like, do you have any projects that I can help out on? That's sometimes gets you something, but a more productive approach is to say, I've been looking at this. I noticed you do that. I found some synergies and possible opportunities for me to help you with a particular project that I saw that you were publishing on, and, you know, wondered if what I do can add some value to what you're doing. And usually they'll say yes. That's probably the most productive way to do that. If there are labs in your own institution that are interesting to you, you can just go right up to the PI. It's rare. And I tell the medical students all the time, neurosurgeons are busy. Do not feel bad if you email somebody and they don't reply. You just keep forwarding the email and saying, hi, you know, just wanted to check in, ask their assistant. It's very, very rare that a neurosurgeon will not help a medical student. There's honestly not that many of you. And so there's always some way for us to help you. So don't feel bad. It's just sometimes they might have missed your email. It's not a rejection. Go around, find their assistant, ask their assistant, and they will usually apologize profusely and say, oh my gosh, it went to spam, or I didn't notice, I was on vacation, I was in the OR for 10 days, you know, something, but just keep up at it.
Okay. What do you think about women taking on the administrative role rather than direct executive roles?
So you probably mean like the working roles. And I think that that's really, really an important thing to show. If you can do some of the dirty work, Sergio mentioned Dr. Puzo. Dr. Puzo always says, if somebody throws you a book chapter, it's kind of not a really exciting, you know, possibly not a really exciting thing to work on compared to help out with that Nature, you know, publication as first author. But you want to do some of this work in the background, show that you can get the job done, and people will bring you onto projects that are of escalating importance and escalating levels of leadership.
What is the overlap between neurosurgery and health equity, community health?
That's an interesting question. You know, neurosurgery is something that tends to happen in tertiary or quaternary care centers, and sometimes there is underserved community problems, as in often there are hospitals where there are no neurosurgeons at all, and they might have one neurosurgeon covering several hospitals that are geographically spread out, and they'll have people kind of temporizing the situation, transferring patients around in emergency rooms. And sometimes a way to get involved in health equities and health disparities work is by serving some of these communities, serving some of these hospitals. But when I first went into neurosurgery, one of the first sets of jobs that I had was serving in a bunch of hospitals in the South Bronx and North Harlem, where I saw things that I'd never seen before, gunshot wounds and all sorts of, you know, kind of end stages of neurosurgical diseases that wouldn't have happened in the Upper East Side of Manhattan place that I trained. So it's good for the neurosurgeon, it's good for the patients, but these places had a tough time getting neurosurgeons to work with them. There are opportunities for neurosurgeons to address healthcare disparities. I know that you'll be having Dr. Hoffman come on, and she does a lot of work, as does Dr. Rousseau, in global health, and offering neurosurgical care to places in the world that did not always have the opportunity to have that. So there's actually a lot of opportunity in that sector of the healthcare industry. I think we have 4 minutes left. 3 minutes, yeah, something like that.
Any other questions that you guys have? You've been asking some great ones. So
I think somebody put something in a chat to me. Let's see what they say.
Someone just said something. How do we help address some of those disparities you were talking about in those communities in need?
So there are organizations that do that. Again, it's things that are not necessarily in my scope of interest or scope of expertise, but there are organizations that specifically address both global health and neurosurgery. There are conferences on that now. It's really becoming a growing area of interest within neurosurgery. And certainly it's a niche area in which you can excel as a medical student because it's such a rapidly growing area of interest within neurosurgery to work specifically on addressing healthcare disparities in neurosurgery.
Yeah, and Dr. Hoffman is saying she'd be happy to address this more once we begin at 1.
Awesome, thank you. I know you do that, Caitlin. That's great, thanks. So if you guys have any questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and that way you guys can reach out. And so am I, yeah, there we go. I have access to the chat. Okay, good.
Yep, and then I'm going to put Monica's and Dr. Mew's in mine there too.
Good. But it's really great to see you guys spending a Saturday morning and afternoon together. Women are a special crowd. Men are great too, but I think sometimes we have special interests that need to be discussed in neurosurgical careers. So we got good. And then Sergio put the director's email in there. All right, great. I'll let you guys transition to the next section and I'll be listening in. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I think we're still waiting for a few people. Thank you guys for joining, whoever's here so far. Just give us 1 second.
Good morning, Susie.
Good morning.
Good
Hi.
morning.
Good morning. Happy afternoon. Happy
Sliding in the afternoon. Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Dr. Hoffman and I are colleagues, if you guys haven't figured that out. But we probably, this is probably more than we've seen each other in the past year.
Yep.
So. All right, I'll go dark and I'm gonna listen. All right, guys.
Yeah, we're still just waiting for a few more people, but I guess if we could give it a few more minutes, if you guys wouldn't mind. Yeah, if anybody needs to take a break, Dr. Pannullo makes a good point. We could take like a 2-minute break while we're waiting for everybody to set up.
I was suggesting a water break just because a potty break is politically incorrect, even for a bunch of women, but.
How long is this expected to go for?
Until 2 we're allotted.
2 p.m. Eastern?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're only waiting for one more person, so I guess I could start introducing you. just to kind of save some time. But before I do that, for all of you I haven't met before, I'm Devin. I'm a third-year medical student at New York Medical College, and I'm a junior director of education here with the MSNTC. So thank you all for joining us today. It's been a great event so far, so I'm really happy that you could all be here. Okay, so for who is here, I'm going to just do a little introduction so that everyone kind of knows your backgrounds and what other questions they might be able to ask you. So Dr. Babu is a neurosurgeon at Cleveland Clinic with clinical interest in neurotrauma and research interest in health policy, including the human and financial impact of legislation. Dr. Sedney is associate professor and program director at West Virginia University, trained in orthopedic spine surgery with research interests in bioethics and health policy. Dr. Chen is the assistant professor of neurosurgery at UPenn and CHOP. She's a pediatric neurosurgeon with research interests in pediatric tumor biology and vascular disorders. Dr. Hoffman is the assistant professor of neurological surgery at Weill Cornell. She's a pediatric neurosurgeon with interest in pediatric brain tumors and mentoring of trainees from underrepresented communities. Dr. Sweet is an assistant professor at Case Western Reserve. She's trained in stereotactic and functional neurosurgery with interest in neuromodulation and novel applications of neurotechnology. And Dr. Strale is the assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis. She's a pediatric neurosurgeon running a lab studying germinal matrix hemorrhage, intraventricular hemorrhage, and hydrocephalus. So with that, thank you for all being here.
Thank you.
So I guess the way that this session is supposed to run, because it's a panel, I'm going to just ask you some questions we have, and if the audience has any, you can just put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, whichever you're more comfortable with. So I'll just go to the questions we have. So the first one we have is wondering if any of you or all of you can tell us a little bit about your practice, including the types of patients and conditions you treat, the environment, and the overall lifestyle of these programs. So whoever would like to take that.
I can start, just sort of a snapshot into, I guess, sort of a week in my practice, sounds like. So I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. I take care of really a full spectrum of pediatric neurosurgical conditions. I do have a special interest in brain tumors, craniosynostosis, vascular, fetal surgery. So I think pediatric neurosurgery is one of the subspecialties within neurosurgery where you can still do sort of a broad range of types of procedures. I have 2 operating days per week, and I have 1 clinic day. Because I have a lab, I try to combine 2 full clinics into 1 clinic. And I know some of you as part of the attendee list have been to clinic, and it's a pretty fast moving clinic, but that allows me to try to set aside, a day and a half, 2 days to work on things in the lab, which really takes up all the rest of my time. So sometimes, weekends and sort of fit in time here and there to be able to move things forward with respect to papers and grants. But it does make things a lot more interesting being able to, really generate clinical questions by seeing patients and then take them to the lab and try to come up with solutions.
So I'm also a pediatric neurosurgeon, so I can come on Jen's heels. I have a very similar structure. I think that is one of the wonderful aspects of peds, that we really are generalists, and of course continue to define niches based on our academic interests. But I also see a wide array of patients and treat every disorder, cranial and spinal. My specific areas of expertise are epilepsy surgery and craniofacial surgery. So that's 70% of my practice is craniofacial, and the remainder is epilepsy. And then, through call and normal schedules, you end up seeing the remainder of the spectrum of neurosurgical disorders in the pediatric population. I also have a very similar structure. I have 2 days of clinic. I actually have 2.5. I run clinics off-site in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx to ensure that we, extend our access to those communities. I don't operate there, but I do run clinics to therefore at least provide access points. And then I bring patients back to Cornell for surgery should they need it. And so that's another day of mine. And then 2 operative days. And then, where there is academic time, as Dr. Straley was indicating, it can be difficult to carve out wherever it is. I try to grab it. My academic interests are more clinical. I don't have a lab, but I do a lot of clinically oriented studies that relate to, genetics and outcomes, as well as a lot of work on the impact of healthcare disparities and means for mitigation. And I also do a lot of global work. So I work in Tanzania up until COVID at a minimum of once or twice a year in a rotating group of physicians that travels to a specific hospital that we partner with several times a year with our residents and fellows, if that's, of interest to anyone as we move through the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to circle back to that, but Dr. Senya, were you going to go next?
Although mine is pretty similar to everybody else. I think everybody on here is in an academic practice. So I think that we're maybe missing a bit of variety, but so I'm mostly spine. So I do all adult spine, which works great for my department because everybody else wants to do the brain stuff. So it works very well for everybody. I do usually 1 to 2 days of OR a week, 1 day of clinic, and 2 days of administrative and research. And I don't have a lab. I do sort of non-basic science research. So.
Hey guys, sorry I'm joining late. We're back-to-back emergencies.
Oh boy, well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here.
So yeah, we were just talking a little bit about your practice, like a glimpse into a weekly schedule for you, just so that everyone can have a better understanding.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna go through a week when I'm not on call, like today. Basically the day starts around 6:15 to 6:30, where you come in the hospital, you round on all your inpatients, and then you sign up and sign in all the patients for elective surgery. Typically elective surgery starts between 7 and 7:30. And I'm a dual trained vascular neurosurgeon. I should start by introducing myself, actually. I'm Dr. Stabs Makaris. I work at Thomas Jefferson. My title is Professor of Neurosurgery, and I'm the director of the fellowship here for cerebral vascular and endovascular, also the director of the clerkship for the medical students. And so busy place. Like I said, the day starts early, and then depending on how many cases I have, it could be open cases like clips, or endovascular cases, which we could have a greater number of cases in a shorter period of time. But on an average, operative date ends around 3 o'clock. And then you have about a few hours to do everything else, which entails writing your notes, checking on your post-op patients, and then handling any office tasks. All of us by now have thousands of patients that we follow long-term. So now through Epic, you get daily tasks on the average, maybe 20 tasks of follow-up imaging that need to be reviewed and addressed, or questions. Some are more urgent than others from your patients, so you need to stay on top of that. And then research time. So operative time, typically in our practice, 4 days a week. 1 day a week, we have office hours. The day may start a little bit later, maybe around 8 o'clock, and typically hours end around 3 to 4, where you see outpatients and your follow-ups. And then in between, you try to do research. We are a very heavy publishing department, very academic. So reviewing papers. We have 4 research fellows that we review different projects. And then your national committees. So if you're involved in some of the national and international committees, now since COVID, luckily, you can check a lot of those meetings online with Zoom. The problem is that a lot of them are accommodating West and East Coast at the same time, so they tend to be later, like 8 o'clock. So it's pretty involved. The weeks that I'm on call, the sky's the limit. Typically, we take 1 week at a time. Depending on how many have joined your practice, it's either every third or every fourth week. It can be, for example, here we started with emergencies at 8 o'clock, and we're getting another stroke as we speak. So it's just nonstop. Some weeks can be very light on call, but ideally during those weeks, you try not to have a lot of social activities, or if you have activities with family or kids that cannot be missed, you need to plan ahead of time and have backup.
Thank you for that. I guess the next question, I guess I could just ask, like pinpoint a few of you just to make it a little bit more varied. Dr. Sweet, I would like to ask this one to you if that's okay. But what factors are important for a future woman in neurosurgery to consider when choosing the field and or a subspecialty?
Oh, that's a good one. So hi, I'm Jennifer Sweet, and I'm at Case Western University, Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. I think there are a lot of different factors. I think everybody's just made really good points about kind of what their setup looks like. And I guess what I would convey to young women who are considering this field is that you can really shape your practice how you want to. It's obviously going to be really challenging in residency because that's going to be the time where you're really going to be committing your schedule and your life. But I do think that nowadays there's a lot more opportunity for variations in that in your practice. We just heard one example of a really busy inpatient clinical scenario schedule. What I do is stereotactic and functional neurosurgery. So I have patients who are healthier typically than some of the sicker patients. I think that's something that a lot of people who are considering neurosurgery don't really think about, is that some of our patients can be really healthy. We can see patients in an outpatient setting. A lot of my patients are chronic pain patients or Parkinson patients, tremor patients. We do deep brain stimulation for OCD. There's a lot of room and research for investigating different areas in the brain for targets. So you can kind of really set up your practice how you want. I have a research grant, so I spend a couple days a week looking, doing my research with the lab. You can do this however you want. We've heard other examples of other women. I have a couple days a week where I operate, and one really busy day a week where I see patients. And so I think you can really tailor your practice to how you want. I know that some of my colleagues in private practice, I don't know how many, if we haven't representation from private practice individuals, but they've really set up their practices quite differently than that. And they do a lot more of the business aspect of things. They have a different schedule when they're on call, going to different hospitals. So I think that if you're a young woman considering this field, it is rigorous, and there are a lot of times where it's going to be really, really busy. But for the most part, there are options nowadays, and you can still have a family and you can still have a personal life. It's harder in the residency portion, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's kind of what I would offer. Sorry to go rambling on and on.
No, that was great. Thank you. I feel like most people would have the same kind of advice, but if anybody else has anything to add, feel free to. Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
I have a quick addition. Pursuing vascular doesn't necessarily mean we don't have families or lives.
I didn't mean that, but you're
No, I know. I just don't want to discourage any students who may be interested in vascular. You know, happily married with 2 kids. My husband is actually a surgeon as well, not a neurosurgeon. So, but it's doable. You need a lot of support. Whether you do vascular functional, you need to have, you know, support system at home, whether we have a live-in nanny, for example. You know, be very friendly with mothers and your kids' grades. Because you can, you know, arrange for pickups and drop-offs, and you can fill in for each other. and family. If you have family that are close by and grandparents that can help. I found that earlier on when you have young babies, extremely careful because it's very tough for a mom to leave a newborn to somebody that she doesn't trust. So.
And did you have kids in resident in training or later on?
So Jennifer, I was crazy. I had kids in training. So I shouldn't say crazy because it's doable, but I had one halfway through my chief year and halfway through my fellowship. And I had one as a young attending. As you know, there's never a right time. So I remember as a resident, I'm like, I don't really want to have a kid when I'm in a resident or a junior resident or a mid resident or a senior resident, and then as a chief. And then I attended a AMWA, the American Medical Association for Women conference, where one of my role models here, who's a general surgeon, said, there's never a right time. And she was doing exactly what I was doing as an attending, but when she was a resident, delaying it to the point where sadly, she was not fertile anymore and she couldn't have kids. Before you know it, she was in her late 30s. Because then you're young attending and arguably, well, you know, establishing my practice or I'm building my national reputation. And she adopted and she's very happy with her setup. But she said if she were to do it all over again, she would start trying when she and her husband were ready. So somehow you need to completely ignore what's happening around you at work and just stay focused in your family life. If it's the right time for you and your partner to have kids, please have kids. Because you work anything out with your program and your co-residents. Everything is evolving. So now we have our residents going out on paternity leave, which I love. It's not just being a young mother, it's being a young father. So this applies to everybody. You need to enjoy when your babies are young and newborn. These moments are not coming back.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's, a wonderful point, and also brings up a couple other things that I think are important to think about if you're going into the training phase of this. I also had my kids during training. I had both of them during residency, and it was perfectly fine. It was hard like anything, but that's not, there are a lot of other, jobs that people do and have kids, and it's hard. It just is. And I think that, the most important factor, no matter what discipline you're in this world, is your community. And I think it's really important to stress the fact that as important as it is to also, yes, the points that have been made about selecting a field and thinking about the ability and flexibility of any given field is paramount. And the institution itself and the culture of that institution is paramount, and these are things that are not, universal. So it is important to pay attention to all aspects of, the community environment that, you're thinking about establishing your life and career in, right? So look around, have honest, frank conversations with residents, with the chairman, with, be clear as to what your goals are and make sure that you're in a community environment that's going to support you achieving them, because it's not universally the same across every program.
That's a great point. I remember as I was interviewing, and this is circa 2002, not a lot of female applicants at the time. So there were 5 of us and we all knew each other well. Right. At the end of an interview and very prestigious programs, I have had some residents come up to me and say, as a medical student, do not come here. This is not a woman-friendly program. Right. And I'm hoping this is from another decade, where this is almost 2 decades ago that this doesn't happen. But like you very nicely stated, take a look around you. So when you are a student applying for residency, talk to the residents, see if there's any female residents, talk to them. If you're a resident applying for being an attending, landing a job, take a look at the young attendings and right. See, can they be your partners? Do they have families? And things of that nature. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah, it's your community determines a lot of your quality of life. So just pay attention to that community.
I haven't talked yet, so I feel like I should. I'm Shinshin, I'm from CHOP and Penn. I obviously agree with all of this. I think that I came from an institution that is not very female heavy, and it didn't sway me from it. And I never felt any, I mean, kudos to my chairman because he's very like accommodating, but I never felt any weirdness because I was the only female. And so I don't think that you should be turned off by like, there has to be like 50% of, you know, the faculty or anything is female. I think you just have to, like everyone said, realize like all the males, you know, if they're supportive, that's good enough. Like you don't have to find a program that has a bunch of females. Having said that, now there's much more, like practically more females than males in the residency program. And before it was essentially just me. Again, like, you know, going on the second decade. But, and then I just realized in my practice now, even at a pediatric institution, I am the only non-white male, like in my division. But I didn't realize it until like I said it out loud to someone in the PICU, and then they said to me like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize it because, well, one, I don't portray myself as that. I just like get the job done and like I don't really, you know, do anything else. But also, it says something about my partners, like they never feel like, oh, we're the white males, and then you're like the little Asian female, you know. So I think that has a lot of say to it. So I never necessarily like picked out a program where people were, you know, looked like me or anything like that. But, you know, definitely I think that the support, as long as everyone is like fully supportive of you, like even if they're, you know, an elderly white male, like that's perfectly fine. Yeah, I feel like we've touched upon that a few times just throughout the day, that it doesn't necessarily have to be people that look like you to support you, but it doesn't hurt, I guess. But that's great that you guys have that supportive framework regardless. I guess to just keep on with this organic way of us discussing, for those of you that do have families, how do you balance your practice with the family? And does your family understand it and everything like that?
I can speak to that just briefly. I have 3 kids, 3, 6, and 9, 3 girls. And my husband was an internal medicine physician and a hospitalist. So, and I had kids, one in sort of mid-residency, one during my chief year, and then one as a junior attending. The junior attending baby was, I think, a little bit harder than the other 2. And similar, you know, to what was already said, I was delaying having children because I did not think that there was a right time. And I realized it's very difficult to time your pregnancies due to, it's hard to get pregnant. And similarly, I had a chance encounter with another woman within pediatric neurosurgery that said to me, you know, just have your children whenever. And it was just that one conversation that, you know, resulted in me having a kid during my chief year. Anyway, so I just related to the family. We're in St. Louis and I'm from New Jersey. My husband's from Minnesota. We don't have family in the area. We have a lot of support. We had, 2 great nannies. Our current nanny just had a baby 3 days ago. So we have, she's going to come back and work for us with her baby. What I wanted to touch upon was that when I first started practice, I felt like I just felt that, I'm the only woman here in terms of an attending, and I didn't want to use family schedule or, to alter my current schedule. And so my husband was sort of the default parent for a while. He got his MBA and is now a consultant at McKinsey. And so the tables have turned a little bit, and it's been interesting, and it's okay. I will delay the start of my, something came up where he had to go out of town and something fell through, and I had to delay the start of my case until 9, and, the world didn't end. My schedule in the morning is a little bit different. I'm not in the hospital at 6:15. I do frequently have meetings, Zoom meetings, usually at 7. There's usually some sort of conference, but 3 days a week, I am not in the hospital. My operative days, I'm at the hospital early, but the other 3 days, I theoretically could take my kids to school if I wanted to. So just a glimpse into handling things. So I think a lot of it just depends on the situation you're in. If you have a partner, what your partner is doing. So now I'm, not necessarily the default parent, but I'm adjusting my schedule and just saying, you know what, I can't make this meeting, or, I need to arrange my schedule this way. The call weeks, I take a week of call at a time. And then, yes, those are the times when you just are not you can't guarantee you're going to be available and having the appropriate help, but we said I'm not on call. There may be a time when, something comes in where I say to my partner, you know what, I can't take care of this. Can you take care of it? And it's okay. The world doesn't end. So leaning on your partners. So
I can give you a real life example from yesterday. Flew back from conference and my daughter had a preview of middle school. She's transitioning next year. And my husband was the backup. I was hoping to be there on time. I wound up being 30 minutes late, but I still made it. It was still fun. You may not be a super mom and, have the home baked cookies and the meetings, and you may be a little late, but having a supportive spouse is paramount, like was mentioned.
Dr. Sedney, were you gonna add something?
Oh yeah. So I have 4-year-old twins and I have a 2-year-old. So my kids are much younger. I had them, while I was faculty. So like to echo what everybody else said, the challenges are just different. And so it's just important to know what sort of difficulties you might overcome whenever you choose to have kids. But my husband is a stay-at-home dad. And so he is like the main caretaker of the family. And so, obviously probably like the most important person in the family, and very supportive. And again, I would just echo to what was already said. Like I really embraced the role of the slacker mom and like in school and like my kids' Valentines were like not as good as everybody else's Valentines. And that's just like totally okay. But the stay-at-home dad thing is really essential for us for my schedule, I've noticed. So.
Yeah,
Okay, at least you had Valentine's.
I'll do.
I said at least you had Valentine's.
I'll do the counterpoint because it seems like, and I'm interested in seeing what Caitlin says since we both have dual neurosurgery families. But my husband is a neurosurgeon. He is a functional stereotactic neurosurgeon at Penn. I do everything. Like I'm not even gonna pretend that he helps me at all. So my parents come in, sometimes they live in Florida to help out. My mom is basically like a 70-year-old woman, being a 20-year-old nanny. I have had 2 au pairs simultaneously. I have had an au pair and a nanny essentially my kids' entire lives. I have 7.5-year-old twins and an almost 5-year-old. And then COVID happened and my part-time nanny became my full-time nanny because of COVID. And then now I'm back to having 2 au pairs because my nanny is 36 weeks pregnant. So I was classroom mom because someone forced me to, not because I wanted to be. I think that I'm slacking in everything kid related, but the principal of the school was essentially no, I see you everywhere. And I don't know how you're here and then also working. So I think that we are always really hard on ourselves about it, but other people don't see it that way. And then they asked me to be on the medical board too. So I guess I'm enough that people know who I am because I'm not completely not there. But in terms of household, everything, I don't even tell my husband where when something's happening. So one day I had, a really hard tumor. I knew I wasn't going to be home. And then the nanny at that time, I didn't have a backup, couldn't work in the afternoon. So I had to have random people to take my kid, from school, to be at their house, not random people, their friends, but and then I had to have my neighbor pick up the twins from the bus stop. So things I can, still do it essentially as almost a single parent because I don't even ask my husband to help out at all. He's basically, I act like he's not there. So yeah, I mean, both ways of it, but I mean, I still make it work. So.
Yeah, I think It's obviously quite individual. I think it depends so much on factors that, could begin to get into. Every family is different in its structure. I think the things that I would stress are this, I also, my husband's also a neurosurgeon. He's also a pediatric neurosurgeon for the exact same division. So our call schedules are quite interesting because as a family, we're basically on call 60% of the time. But it's perfectly fine. And going back to a lot of the other really excellent points that have been made, you really do have a lot of capability that I feel is increasing, over time to structure your life, based on what's important to you and based on who, you are as an individual and also what you want your family structure to be. Some people love the clinical, constant hard driving practice, and they want to be in the OR 7 days a week, and that's wonderful. Other individuals, just like anyone, this is not specific to women, want something that is more controlled and not have the constant unpredictability unless you're on call. I mean, these possibilities exist, and that extends to your home life and how it interfaces with your professional life. I would say the most important point that I would make, and one that you're hearing, is getting really good help is a game changer in quality of life. So for some people, as you're hearing, that's their spouse, which is amazing. For others, I had a complete shift in quality of life when we found, our nanny, who's been with us for now, ever since I went to fellowship, because I wasn't actually in the same country as my kids for a year during fellowship. So our nanny was, kind of mom number 2 for that whole year. And she's been with us ever since for about 8 years now, or 9 years. And so just investing and taking the time to find that correct structure for whatever it is that your family structure is, who your partner is, whether you even want to have children, if you do have children, right? This is so individual. So based on that, just put in place a structure that allows you to be very flexible, very agile, and not feel the strain and stress of that pull all the time, because that can get extraordinarily exhausting. So I will say, having a mental pull all the time about worrying and wondering, if your family or home, whatever that means to any individual, is okay, without your presence, that's exhausting, right? That's not sustainable. So you do need to set up your practice in your life in a way that, take yourself into consideration, take your partner into consideration, and invest in setting up a structure that gives you peace of mind, flexibility, and, a structure that is sustainable. That's one thing that I've seen colleagues and friends maybe take a little too long to get to and go through a lot of stress and anxiety over it. So just feel empowered and confident and comfortable in the fact that it is possible. You're looking around at a lot of different models and ways to go about this, and they all work. But I just would say invest and be very deliberate in the way you set up your time and your home structure.
Yeah, thank you all who answered that. I think that's really important advice. Again, I feel like it just comes down to priorities and how you want to prioritize things. So thank you for bringing that point home. From your perspective, anyone can answer this. From your perspective, what are the most important issues facing women in neurosurgery today?
I can tackle. So I think one of the ongoing issues is women in neurosurgery becoming leaders in the field, becoming chairwomen in their departments, becoming national PIs in major studies. I think everything is changing in our field and in medicine in general. I know at Thomas Jefferson, this is the 3rd year in a row that I think I can think of that the greatest majority of the class are women. So, but still you'll see, for example, in our entire country, I think there's only 3 or 4 female chair women. In our section, the cerebral vascular section, we actually now just changed the title from chairman to chairperson, just to give you an idea of how things are shifting. But I'm hoping that women in general will become leaders in the field. and expand their skill set, not just in being excellent surgeons and taking care of their patients, but also being executives in the field and rising in that manner.
I would
Yeah.
echo the same thing. I think
Okay.
it's, I think there's a lot of systems in place now. Like, for instance, when I was going through residency, there was women in neurosurgery, but there weren't, at least I wasn't aware of a lot of women-based groups at the medical student level, resident level, even young attending level. You know, I went to a women in medicine leadership course several years ago as a junior attending, and it was wonderful, and it was really great. But I would echo the same thing. I think there are a lot of women residents now, in some programs approximating 50%. But when you get to the, you know, associate professor level, you know, I'm the only woman that's ever worked at WashU, as I'm sure many of you are probably the only women attendings in your respective programs. But as I'm going from associate professor to professor and thinking about leadership, you know, section head or chair, or other leadership roles, I think that there's still a little bit more work to be done in that transition from junior attending to leadership, whether it's within the institution or nationally within the organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, we have a lot of evolving data, you know, clearly supporting that there does appear to be this very, you know, clear ceiling between, you know, the numbers of transitioning assistant to associate or associate to professor female neurosurgeons versus our male counterparts. You know, it's really interesting to dive into the reasons why. And I think it's, you know, one of the most important things that we all need to do, you know, as a community is identify what are those contributing factors. We can all assume, but I think until we actually really look at the contributions and the barriers, it's hard to overcome them. I think one of the things that has been, you know, repeatedly identified is the concept of minority tax, meaning, you know, yeah, we're usually the only women in our respective divisions, meaning then we are the ones that are looked to mentor all of the, you know, female students coming up, and then looked at to run this, that, and the other, you know, women's neurosurgical group. But at the end of the day, there are only so many hours in the day, you know, so, you know, being able to focus on your own requirements for promotion, you know, I think a lot of us probably experience this pull that we don't put that first when there is an entire, you know, community to mentor and help. And so sometimes that balance is a little off. And so, you know, protected academic time, trying to balance some of the, you know, work of, you know, mentorship and just the roles that we all play in our respective communities with those factors that we need to gain our own, you know, upward momentum is something that I think is really important. And I think each institution probably has to devise mechanisms to support that.
Yeah, I feel like mentorship has come up a lot, and obviously we had a whole section of this webinar today dedicated to it. Can some of you tell us a little bit about how mentorship actually helped shape your career thus far?
I'll take this one. I think for me personally, I had a mentor who basically changed the whole trajectory of my career easily. And that actually is a male mentor who I came to do a fellowship with at Case Western, still at Case Western, largely because of him and because of the great team there. And we have a ton of women, actually, well, we have 4 women faculty and a ton of female residents and things, but a lot of the mentors I had were great men, and they basically pushed me and got me involved in so many things that I had no desire to get involved in, I thought, but have been really rewarding, whether it was research or whether it was all the society stuff and all of the organized neurosurgery areas. And I think it's just, it's really critical to have somebody be there to support you. And so I think if you have somebody who is there to bounce ideas off of and to, you know, just ask questions with and be honest with, there are plenty of people who will potentially guide you in that direction, in the right direction. But I think people kind of are oblivious and don't really realize that we might need some direction, or maybe as me personally, as a woman, I was really scared to do that early on. And I think in my training, I was just a lot different and a lot more scared and reserved to ask for what I needed. And so I think it's really important to identify those mentors. I will also say that being really involved in all the organized neurosurgery and all the different society things that we have, I think that there are a lot of people who are making that effort, who are trying to change the way that it is and trying to make women more visible and trying to put women on panels and have leadership and mentorship opportunities. So if you are interested in kind of finding this in an organized neurosurgical way more formally, like the Congress of Neurological Surgeons, Women in Neurosurgery, a lot of the different sections have individual areas where they're all trying to reach out to women and underserved, just underrepresented minorities and everybody else. I think there are just a lot of efforts that are actively occurring now in all these areas where you can find people who want to mentor you and want to take that role. So, and you can always reach out to me as well afterwards or something, and I can help direct you.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, since we are talking about this and since you are obviously all willing to come here and help us today, if you wouldn't mind putting your contact information or something in the chat box so that people maybe could reach out to you, because I know sometimes it is hard to find female mentors. So if you're willing to do that, that would be great. Thank you. And I guess another follow-up question to that would be, how do we think that male colleagues could advocate for and be allies to women in neurosurgery? I don't know if anyone's thought about that. I feel like you probably have. Dr. Chen, would you mind maybe tackling this?
I don't necessarily think that it should be any different. I think that they just treat us the same as they would about anybody else. Like, I don't think that it's special treatment or anything like that. Like, what I like about my partners is that it's never like, oh, well, she can do this despite this. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you would never talk about that from a male perspective. So for me, like, all my partners are just like, oh, she's such a great partner. Just like he would be like, he's such a great partner. It's just like no different than any, like how they would treat any of their other colleagues that they admired. I don't, expect anything different. I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about it, because I never feel isolated or out of the group or anything like that. I think maybe even just that is the best thing possible. Like, I always feel like I'm just, part of the team.
I can jump in too. I think, male colleagues have a really important role. I think there's a lot of systemic bias still. And it's all day. I mean, it's when you're talking to a patient, when you're talking to a nurse, and especially if you look young, I think there's a lot of just ingrained biases that we all have, but folks who can, reinforce, this is my colleague, she does excellent work, those sorts of little comments here and there, I think go a long way, not only with patients, but all the support staff. Because we all know operating rooms are filled. It's a lot of gossip and, all of these things. And our male colleagues, I think, are by default looked at very differently and have a very much more stronger and respected position than, we do in many cases. And I think if they can reinforce and also just be seen to be supportive, I think that can go a long way. And I just wanted to say too, I don't want anyone to feel isolated, because I've been on a zillion of these where, we talk about how wonderful it is to have a great supportive partner and all these things. And just know not everyone's path is that ideal. It would be wonderful, but, not everyone walks that path, and there are setbacks and there are obstacles that you may not even anticipate. And I think a lot of times, when we think about mentors, we think about folks who are older, more senior. You can have colleagues, you can have counterparts that are your mentors, you can have junior residents that are your mentors or juniors, just folks who may have similar experiences to you, who can help you through difficult circumstances, I think can be a tremendous source of support and strength. So I just don't want anyone to feel isolated because, not everything always works out the way we anticipate, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, that's life. And I think that's probably more of everyone's experience than less. So just to make mention of that. And I'll say too, I've been in academics. I'm actually in an employed kind of pseudo private practice. It's not, truly private practice, but employed. So a lot more flexibility. And I would say there's a lot of differences. And so again, it's trade-offs, what you choose, to make your career of, or if you like clinical practice and kind of what you want to craft your practice to be. So certainly I'm happy to talk about the employed private side as well.
Yeah, and I would build on that as well in terms of, the original question about, what can our counterparts do to continue to further support, our involvement in the field. I think you just carry that beyond just, that type of daily support and daily recognition with patients and colleagues into also organized neurosurgery editorial board positions, right? Because that's really important. A lot of these positions, just because of the nature of the field, are held currently by men, just because that's what that's how the field was constituted, up until recently. So it actually requires an active, not changing of the guard, but different inclusion of the guard to fold women into that, right? Because that actually you have to forcibly change and update editorial board compositions, the senior positions in organized neurosurgery, et cetera, because these are all invited positions that don't necessarily change all that often. A lot of the organized neurosurgical groups are now shifting that, so they're only 2-year terms, et cetera. So that's engendering, and it is demonstrating, I think, a very clear, deliberate move to be much more inclusive, not just of women, but in general, of all the voices that are present in our field. So I think that that's paramount to just diversifying in general, the leadership and the editorial boards that shape what we put out into the literature as a field. So I think that's really important.
I think it's great that at some institutions they have, like you guys have, unwavering support from your male counterparts. But I think someone earlier mentioned as a student, she can't imagine doing anything other than neurosurgery, but finds herself in a culture and institution with male neurosurgeons who openly discourage her. So we gave her a little bit of advice, but does anyone have actual advice to help her kind of combat that or get through it?
I know the simple answer would be to ignore it. It's a lot of times the comments come from folks that are not even in neurosurgery. And so it's their perception of one's experience in neurosurgery. I'm sure all of us in this panel have heard it, and I hear it from medical students. I sit on a lot of these panels, and undergrads and medical students are routinely, even in 2022, told that they should not do neurosurgery due to their gender or family aspirations or partner status or whatever. The simple answer is please find and seek out mentors or folks to talk to within neurosurgery that are supportive. And I would just ignore it. I don't have maybe others have a better answer other than just ignore it.
Yeah, no, it's just not relevant. So for sure, you just have to look around at the examples outside of your institution. And that's, it circles back around to the initial comments that the cultures of individual institutions remain quite variable. So you just have to pay attention to your environment. And as you're seeing, there are so many wonderfully supportive institutions of any and all walks of life. Yes, we are one part of that, but it's really most important that institutions are just supportive of a diverse workforce, period, no matter what that means. And I think you just have to be clear in deciding on what environment and culture you're going to surround yourself with.
I would just say, urge that person to reach out to me, honestly, because it's challenging. You know, you need a chairman letter, you need, you know, a faculty endorsement to go through the process. I mean, I think that's the challenge. And certainly, I will say I've had, you know, via social media, folks reach out to me, which is fantastic, and just say, you know, I don't have anyone in my institution who's supporting me. What can I do? And I think it has to be kind of the one-on-one, unfortunately, because each situation is going to be a little bit different. But we are in many ways stuck in what our institution may do. Now there's ways around those roadblocks, but I think you just have to reach out to someone who would be able to help navigate that. And you're not going to have that experience or exposure. So like I said, I'm very happy to help.
Okay, well, in the last few minutes, I guess if we could all just go around maybe and think about one thing that you wish you would have known as a medical student before entering into the field. Like, what would you tell yourself?
I can take that.
Sorry.
That's okay. Don't doubt yourself. I feel like, especially some of the older one of us in the group, where I was the only female resident, I was the only female student in my medical school that wanted to pursue it. I felt as if I really had to prove something and stay longer in the hospital, get there earlier in the hospital, do more cases, just to prove that although I'm a woman, I'm trainable and I can be competent and I can be, a talented surgeon. So I'm hoping that in this generation, there's less of that emotion because there's less of that bias. But if you, as you're going through training or applying or have any hints of that, just completely eliminate those thoughts.
I was just going to say that it's a long road. It is 7 years. And if you think about it, if you're going to subspecialize in medicine, even if you were to do pediatrics or internal medicine, you're still looking at a 3 or 4 year fellowship. So either way, I'm not saying that neurosurgery is necessarily longer than other subspecialties, but that it is a long road. And then you're going to blink your eyes and all of a sudden you're on the other side of it and you're, I don't know, 15 years older or 20 years older. So I would, as we talked about earlier, don't put things on hold. I mean, yes, there are certain years within your training where it's going to be a lot busier, you know, that maybe your PGY 2 year and PGY 3 are busier years, but try as much as you can to not put your life on hold because there's never really an end. I used to think, oh, when I graduate residency, I'll be done. And then there was fellowship and then, you know, getting a practice established. So there's always going to be something else. And also with all of that said, it's going to be okay. You're going to do great. And it's all going to work out.
Okay, well, if anybody else has any advice, we'll gladly take it.
No, I think those were both really good comments. I mean, especially don't doubt yourself. I mean, that's really hard, especially if you feel like you're isolated in your institutions or if you feel like nobody really understands why on earth you're doing this. So, which is probably really common. So I think definitely just stay true to yourself and figure it out and find your own path. Like Jen and everyone said, you're gonna figure it out, but believe that what you're feeling or what you want to do is the right thing and just make your own path, regardless of what other people say, because it can be done somehow if that's what you really want to achieve.
So someone's asking if you have any advice for international medical students interested in matching into the US programs.
I can tackle that as we have successfully matched probably 6 or 7 foreign grads, excellent candidates, one of whom became the #1 ranked neurosurgery applicant in most programs. And unfortunately, you have to work harder than the US counterparts. And I feel like what gives you a distinction is research and publications. The particular case and a lot of our research fellows that are able to match in neurosurgery, whether you do 1 or 2 years of research, I recommend just really immerse yourself in the field and in research. And the more you get your name out there and the more publications you have and the more meetings you present, that'll make a difference, and that'll give you a distinction amongst other US applicants. You definitely need to rotate in as many programs as you can. And now with COVID, that could be problematic. Hopefully they'll loosen some of the restrictions and get to know as many programs as you can. But the program where you do the research in is probably your best chance. So pick wisely as to where you would want to consider that endeavor. But it's very doable.
Someone asked, how large are each of your teams, and who are some of the most critical members you need to consider when forming these teams who will contribute to a successful surgical or research dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's going to vary dramatically, but probably within any subdiscipline, most teams are about 3 to 4 partners of people sharing a call pool in general. In our PEDS group, we have 3 of us. I think what's really important in the overall function of the team dynamics, and therefore our quality of life, is that our institution invests heavily in PA support, which we have, as well as fellow support. So we have a PEDS fellow in addition to our residents. A lot of the intangible here, though, right, is what you're hearing from everyone, which is really just what are the actual team dynamics, right? What is your relationship with your partners? And that's a little bit difficult to modify or adjust, other than just, as we've discussed, make sure that you're joining a place where you do feel that there's synergy with that culture. And I think there are also institutional differences in the types of clinical practice structures that they support. There are places that don't invest in APP extensions, and a lot of the day-to-day nitty-gritty is on the physician's shoulders, versus those that really invest heavily in more academic model, and therefore try to take some of the burden of that off of practitioners, allowing for time in the lab, et cetera, by extender support. So just some things to be aware of, I think.
Great. Well, if there are no more questions, I really appreciate you guys all taking the time out to talk with all of us. I think today has been a really great example for all of the participants about how these things are doable and how we do have an ingrained framework of support, I feel like, just having you all here. So thank you again.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.